Good morning, everybody. Namaste. I, Dr. Bindu Menon, along with my colleague, Dr. Manisha Sharma, cordially invite you for our 7th annual conference, Pearls in Clinical Neurology. I warmly welcome each and every delegate who has registered for our conference. We had an overwhelming response of over 800 delegates who have registered for our conference, and we welcome each and everyone who is taking part in this conference from every continent across the globe. Indeed, this is because of our esteemed faculty who we have lined up for our conference today. I cordially and very delighted to welcome our international and national faculty who have agreed to be with us today I should say in the year end. It's a holiday time for all of them. I welcome you all for our Pearls in Clinical Neurology. Every year, since the last 6 years, we have been conducting our annual conference, Pearls in Clinical Neurology. And this year, we continue our academic endeavor on a virtual platform. This year, the theme of the conference is Artificial Intelligence in Neurology. As we all know, artificial intelligence has paved way into our social life, it has paved way into the business, and is now gradually creeping into the healthcare as well. Artificial intelligence is not one technology, and it is a collection of many technologies. Indeed, clinicians and researchers are trying to make the most of the artificial intelligence so that they can deliver the best clinical care, the best diagnostics, and as well as the best treatment care for the patients. To put it simply, artificial intelligence is a simulation of human intelligence in a machine that is programmed to act like a human and to mimic these actions. But then it is not as simple as it sounds as I define an artificial intelligence. And that's why we have the best faculty with us who are going to touch upon artificial intelligence as it today is with neurology. I welcome you all for this Pearls in Clinical Neurology. We have 6 talks today till 1 o'clock, and each talk is for 20 minutes, followed by 5 minutes question and answers. I would like to have all the delegates to kindly put in your questions in the chat box, and we will interact with the faculty after the talk is over. So sit back, relax, have your n number of cups of teas and coffees, but kindly do not leave us till the end because the best continues till the end. May I have the pleasure of inviting our first faculty for this today's talk, Dr. Anita. Dr. Anita is a professor in the School of Computing Sciences, Hindustan Institute of Technology and Science, Chennai, and has 26 years of teaching and research experience. Her main areas of research are AI, data science, natural language processing, and virtual and augmented reality. She has co-authored and authored more than 90 papers in national, international journals, and she is an author of several books. She has carried out many funded research projects and consultancy services, and also an invited speaker for various national and international conferences. Being a reviewer of 9 international journals such as Elsevier and Springer, we have her today with us so that we can she's going to tell us about the fundamentals of artificial intelligence. Dr. Anita, may I request you to share the podium and give us a brief overview of the fundamentals of artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bindu, for that introduction. So today I will be just giving up the fundamentals of artificial intelligence. And first of all, my thanks to the organizers of Pearls in Clinical Neurology Conference for having given me this opportunity. And special thanks to Dr. Bindu Menon. The topics that I would be dealing is about artificial intelligence.
You have to share your slide. Yes.
So the topics that I will be dealing today are artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning. Are you able to see the screen? Yes, okay. Oh, right. Okay, right. So I will be dealing with artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, and what do we actually mean by an artificial intelligence model, how to build a model, and what is the importance of artificial intelligence in medicine. So we all know that our human brain is one of the largest and complex system. Our human brain is capable of handling a number of functions like it controls our thoughts, it helps us to learn, understand, recall, memorize, and then it controls many of the organs of the body. Now, what do we mean by artificial intelligence? So, artificial intelligence actually means we are able to develop a system which is intelligent, which means it's able to work just like how we human beings are capable of doing things. So, that means it should have some cognitive abilities like the ability to learn, ability to understand, ability to reason, it should be able to recall, memorize. So, all these things are what we are able to do. So when we are able to develop a system capable of doing all these things, then we can call that machine as an artificial intelligent machine. Now, John McCarthy, like all of us know, John McCarthy is known as the father of artificial intelligence. So it was in somewhere in mid 1950s, he coined the term artificial intelligence. And according to him, artificial intelligence is defined as the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. So that is the definition of artificial intelligence as given by John McCarthy. Now, artificial intelligence. So, when we speak about artificial intelligence, it's actually a very broad field. And artificial intelligence has got a number of subfields like machine learning, natural language processing, expert system, speech recognition. All these things actually come under artificial intelligence. And now, deep learning. So, these are the most frequent tech buzzwords we hear machine learning and deep learning. Deep learning is actually a subfield of machine learning, and machine learning in turn is a subfield of artificial intelligence. So, same way, all text related applications come under natural language processing. And then we have all speech related activities that come under speech recognition. So, all these things, so when we talk about whether it's a text based application or a speech based application or deep learning, all these things are actually the subfields of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning are the terms we frequently use. But though they are connected, we cannot interchange and use them because there is a difference between artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning. And like I've already told you, artificial intelligence is our superset, and machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence, and deep learning is again a subset of machine learning. Now, actually, what do you mean by machine learning? Machine learning is actually we are giving the ability for the machine to learn on its own. And how is machine learning different from traditional programming? So, in traditional programming, what is being done is we have a programmer who would clearly understand the requirement of the customer, and then based on the requirement, he sits down and writes the various steps in order to carry out the task. And these are coded in any of the programming languages. So, there the programmer had to sit and write down the code for the system to carry out the work. Whereas in machine learning, what we are doing is we are allowing the system to learn on its own with the help of machine learning algorithms. Now, when we make a system to learn using machine learning algorithm, the system will be able to detect objects or classify objects. It will be able to do prediction. So all these things it will be able to do provided we have given proper training to the system. So in order to give training to a model, what we need is we need to have a proper data set. So it's trained over you're using a data set and you're training your model so that it learns from the data set. And after it learns, it's able to do all the functions like prediction, classification, detection, and so on. Now, deep learning is actually a subset of machine learning. So in deep learning, what we are doing is it's almost similar to, we are developing a system which is almost similar to the human brain. Similar to the human brain means we are having a number of layers in between. So we have the input layer and we have the output layer. In between them, we have a number of layers which are known as the hidden layers. And this is actually inspired by the structure and function of the human brain. So what we are seeing in the diagram is the ones which are marked in green is actually our input layer. The ones that are marked blue are the hidden layers, and the pink color is the output layer. So that means your input goes to the input layer. From the input layer, it goes through all these layers in between, and finally we get the output. So each of these layers has got a function to carry out. So in deep learning, the data is filtered through a cascade of multiple layers. So it's not a single layer. So just like our brain, we have got number of layers in between, and the data passes through all these layers, and finally we get the result from the output layer. And depending on how the data is being processed, we will be able to get accurate and type information. Now, we always hear about artificial intelligence model or machine learning model and deep learning model. So what is meant by an artificial intelligence model? So like I told you, in traditional programming, we have the programmer who is sitting and writing down the programs. But in machine learning, what we are doing is we are making the system or the machine to learn on its own using machine learning algorithm. Now, how would the machine learn? So for the machine to learn, we need to have something what is known as the data set. So we have a data set. Now we train our machine learning or deep learning algorithm on the data set. And the resultant of that is what is known as an artificial intelligence model or deep learning model or a machine learning model. So when we build an artificial intelligence model, so when we have built an artificial intelligence model, it actually means we have trained our machine learning or deep learning algorithm on a data set. So once we have done the training, then we also need to validate and do a testing. So these are the three important components of building an artificial intelligence model: training, validation, and testing. Now, training is just like how we teach. So just like how we teach a small kid to identify between a pen and pencil. So you show a pen and tell the child this is a pen or a pencil, and then train the kid. So it's similar to that. We also need to train our system to identify or understand images or objects. So for that, what we need is a labeled data set. So that is used to train the AI or deep learning or machine learning model. And from that, the system learns and it is able to do the prediction or detection and classification. So depending on the training, so how well you have trained, your accuracy will also increase. So training is very important. So training is important because in order to get accurate result, it's very important, and the quality of your data set is also equally important so that you get accurate and perfect results. Now, just like we have already trained, so training means you have just taught your system, and just like any education system, once the training is done, we also do a test to find out if the concepts are being understood or not. So similar to that, here also we have something called the testing. So here what we are doing is we will be giving a data, and then so based on what training you have given, we will check whether the system is able to carry out the task based on the training we have given. So if it is not able to carry out, that means there is something wrong with the training or the training data set. So you will have to refine it. If your testing is working perfect, then you can deploy the model. So this is actually a model of training and testing, how it is actually being done. So initially, when we have decided that we want to develop an artificial intelligence model. So first thing what we need to have is the training data. So once we have a training data, then we train our machine learning or deep learning algorithm on that training data. And what we get is known as the model. So once you have your model ready, so your model is ready. So when you say your model is ready, it actually means you have trained your machine learning or deep learning algorithm on a particular data set for whatever application you want to do. So you have collected the data set, you have trained your machine learning model on that, and then you have developed your model. Now, when your input comes, what you do is you try with this machine learning model. Now, but if you want to do prediction, what you do is your input data will be fed to this machine learning algorithm, and you will check for the results. Now, once it does the prediction, we also need to evaluate whether the results are correct or not. So when you do the evaluation, there might be two chances. One is it might evaluate right or it may be wrong. So if it's right, there is no issue. Otherwise, what we are doing is we are again going back. That's what is being shown here. So you have the training data, then you're doing the training. So we have developed the model. Now to this model, we are feeding the input data, and this is where the whole thing is happening, and then it's able to do the prediction. Now, after doing the prediction, we are checking, evaluating the results and checking whether it's correct or not. So if it's right, okay. If it is wrong, then what we are doing is we're going back and again training the machine learning algorithm. Now, if you want to build any artificial intelligence or machine learning or deep learning model, the basic steps that are involved is first is you need to have your objective, or you should say, I'm going to build a deep learning model or artificial intelligence model for a particular type of application. So once that is ready, we need to identify the data set. So once we get the data set, sometimes what happens is the data set may not be accurate. There might be some mistakes or there might be missing values. All these things will be there. So you need to do a cleaning, and that is known as pre-processing. So you need to clean your data set, analyze the data set, then find out. So there might be number of variables or features available in the data set. Then identify which are the features required for your application. That is known as feature extraction. And once you have identified the features, you will start your training. And once you have trained your model, you need to next do the testing and see whether your model is able to perform accurately or not. And once you are satisfied with the results, then you can deploy the model. So this is the actual steps involved in building any AI or machine learning or deep learning application. Now, I told you in training, what we are doing is we are actually teaching your system. Now, how do your system learn? So for that, we have got three categories of algorithm, which are supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and the third is semi-supervised learning. So in supervised learning, it's somewhat similar to where you have an instructor who tells you everything. So here what we have is we will have a data set where the data set will be completely labeled. So if symptoms are labeled as S1, S2, S3, and so on. So if the symptoms are S1 and has a symptom S3 and has a symptom S4, then he has a disease G1. So like that, the classification, all the details will be available in the data set, and training the system using that is what is known as supervised learning. Then we have another category which is known as unsupervised learning. So in unsupervised learning, we only have the data set, but there is no labels given there. So here the system will have to identify the patterns and do the learning. And we have a third type of learning, which is known as the semi-supervised learning, which is actually a combination of supervised and unsupervised learning. The importance of artificial intelligence in machine learning, in medicine, is very well understood by the publications we have. We have almost 12,000 publications with deep learning applications, 50,000 using machine learning, and around 1 lakh in healthcare. So all of this is with related to artificial intelligence. These are some of the applications of artificial intelligence in healthcare, where you will be able to identify the disease and do the diagnosis. We will be able to do the classification. We will do prediction, and then you will be able to have personalized treatment. Then you can do a number of applications using medical imaging. You can maintain smart health records. All these things are available in healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anita, for that excellent introduction and an overview of what artificial intelligence is for the beginners and probably a revision course for the researchers. Yeah. So as you have said, every decade marked this time actually from artificial intelligence to machine learning to deep learning. And I think all of us are very familiar with one of the most common popular artificial intelligence is the Google search engine, where I search something and the Google gives me 100 tips as to where else I can do, what else I can do. And I think that's how the business is running with artificial intelligence. Dr. Anita, thank you very much. There's a question here from one of our delegate. They have put in that, as you rightly said, that you are training the machine to make it intelligent. But then how can we know how intelligent the machine has become? And is there any assessment to test the intelligence of a machine? Like, yes. So how can we believe that the intelligent machine has indeed become as intelligent as a human being?
So that we are doing during the testing phase. What we do is actually when you have a data set, 80% of the data set we use for training. The remaining we keep for testing. And in testing, because testing, we actually know the results, because the data set, what is available with us is the known values are there. Now, when we do the testing, we check for the accuracy. We have something called as precision and recall, and we check how accurate the system is. So that is how we decide on. So we say it's about 90% accuracy or 95% accuracy. So that is how we decide on the intent, depending on the application.
So whatever data we are entering into the machine to get it trained should also be as proper as we ask the machine.
Right? Yes.
So, okay. So it ultimately is in the hands of the human how effective So from there, and I think once we have trained our computers, probably I'm not going to receive any more messages that you are receiving 1 crore of cash and you are in receipt. So I think all the spams at some point of time are completely going to vanish. Thank you very much, Dr. Anita, for this excellent talk of yours. And I think we will now take this forward towards the next speaker. As we have seen that AI is going to make a profound difference in the healthcare for the better. But then we have to see that how it's going to evolve in the long term, because as all of us know, every technology has got its advantages. Some are foreseen and some are realized only in hindsight. So we really don't know where we stand today. And I should say that neurology as a specialty is one which is only probably stands the only one where we still keep listening to the patient, we still keep examining the patient, we still make a lot of differential diagnosis and then send the patient for the investigations. So I now invite a second speaker. For this conference, Dr. K. Ganapathy. He's neurosurgeon, director, Apollo Telemedicine Networking Foundation and Apollo Telehealth Services of India. He has been the first in South Asia to start a telemedicine department in 1999, stereotactic neurosurgery in May 1995, and robotic neurosurgery in 2008 at Apollo Hospitals, Chennai. He has been the past president to Telemedicine Society of India, former secretary and past president, Neurological Society of India and Indian Society of Stereotactic and Functional Neurosurgery, emeritus professor, Tamil Nadu, Dr. MGR Medical University, formerly adjunct professor, IIT Madras and Anna University Madras, member editorial board and review of national and international journals in telemedicine and neurosurgery with several chapters and scientific papers in index journals, magazines, and non-index journal. He has presented more than 545 papers and has chaired several sessions and has several presentations in international conferences in the last 40 years. You could always follow Professor Ganpati on his website, which he has given us. I invite Professor Ganpati to give his talk on very important question, which we are thinking now is that will artificial intelligence replace clinical neurology? Where do the neurologists stand now? Professor Ganpati, over to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Bindu. You're able to see my slide, I hope?
Yeah, we are able to see. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. First of all, the very provocative question, will AI replace clinical neurology? I would like to substitute the word replace and give a new title saying, how will AI be used in clinical neurology? AI is the new electricity. 100 years ago, electricity transformed industry after industry. AI will now do the same. I intend to spend the next 1,200 seconds in introducing to you the subject of AI, the regulatory and legal issues. You cannot look at AI in isolation. I need to convey that point very strongly. And then, of course, a few examples of AI in clinical neurology, the great debate on whether technology is a means to achieve an end or an end by itself. And finally, what is the take-home message? The core functions of the brain is information processing, decision-making, and action. With 45 years of experience in clinical neurosciences, I probably would be able to process the information which I get in a couple of seconds, whereas I would have taken a couple of minutes or maybe much longer time when I started my career. So this information process is obviously a function of time. And that is where the intelligent AI comes in. It is able to do in a split second what would take us human beings several minutes to do. The term AI, you'll already be familiar with it. The first speaker gave us a very good illustration of the foundations of AI. To me, the letter A stands for augmenting, amplifying, accelerating, and assisting in an ambient milieu. I honestly don't know why John McCarthy used the term artificial. What is artificial about it? It is nothing but an extension of natural, God-given intelligence. AI is the use of computer systems to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. And again, we all know that this is going to be part of the healthcare delivery system only when its adoption results in consistently better outcomes and reduced costs. As a clinician, I need to be convinced, we are still in a stage of transition. I need to be convinced that AI is better than AI, NI, with double-blind randomized control studies which show that outcomes are consistently better and the costs are reduced. AI in clinical neurology obviously requires considerable and a thorough, systematic evaluation before it can be integrated into clinical care. However, it's a disruptive technology and the potential for impact of AI should not be underestimated. The compound annual growth rate of AI in HCR, today is very fashionable to talk in US dollars, I don't know why, is a staggering figure of 6.6 billion US dollars. Using AI to reach a patient is no longer a question of if, it is a question of how. And as somebody said, it's a matter of now. AI should ideally address the problems clinicians really have now in day-to-day clinical practice, not what engineers think clinicians should have. Unfortunately, in the real world, particularly in the field of AI, we develop a solution and then go in search of a problem. Only information that is needed as at present should be supplied, and existing workflows should be augmented, not necessarily redefined. The previous speaker has already dealt at this, so I'm not going into the details, excepting to emphasize the point again and again that we are talking of deduction, reasoning, problem solving, and this is what clinical neurology is all about. Whether you use it as a decision tree learning, whether you use it in the form of Bayesian networks or neural networks, ultimately it's a question of deduction and reasoning. Machine learning, we already have seen a similar slide, supervised, unsupervised, etc. Now, everything goes through a hype cycle. The Gartner's hype cycle for emerging technologies is very well known to many of you. There is a peak of inflated expectations. And I think 2021, this is where we are now. In a couple of years, there will be a trough of disillusionment. And I foresee that by the end of the coming decade, maybe 2028, maybe 2029, we will accept AI. AI will be an integral part of the healthcare delivery system, minus its hype and minus the disillusionment which we see from the real world. There will be a scope of enlightenment, and finally it will settle down. Of course, there are people like Stephen Hawking who have said that the development of full AI could spell the end of the human race. Even Musk, who's already planned a trip to Mars for tourists, has already mentioned about the dangers of AI. The information of this has already been alluded to by the previous speaker, but interestingly, neurology, there are 1,224 publications dealing with AI and clinical neurology, which is considerably higher than in most other subjects. Now, let me go into my specific subject, clinical neurology. A computer-aided diagnosis system trained using considerable patient data, physiological signals and images. This needs to be integrated with advanced signal processing and AI techniques in order for it to be used in clinical neurosciences. First of all, let us understand the magnitude of the problem. We always say there are 1,300 million Indians and less than 2,000 neurologists, 2,000 neurosurgeons to cover this huge population. This is not really true. Gauri Devi, in a very good paper a couple of years ago, showed that possibly as a guesstimate, epidemiologically speaking, there cannot be more than 30 to 35 million people in India having a neurological problem. Roughly, there would be about 600 to 650 diseases of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. I presume that not more than 5% of them would really benefit with the use of artificial intelligence. For example, we have about 50 million epileptics in the world, about 48 million people with dementia. Not every one of them requires AI, but a small subset of seizures which are not being controlled, which are refractive to medical treatment, which would benefit with surgery, definitely the role of AI would be excellent. Now, artificial neural networks have already been employed in the analysis of lumbar spinal stenosis, disc herniation, brain tumors, trauma, cerebral vasospasm, etc. We already know the criticality of using the test data, the training data initially, and then the test data later. However, the best data, the most fantastic predictive analytics do not, as at present, represent an individual patient, nor does it replace, will it ever replace or ever should replace the patient-clinician relationship. I have asked several patients, these are all small numbers, not statistically valid, but nevertheless, most patients today are of the opinion that he, she is unique. Their wants are unique, and they're not really very comfortable with an AI algorithm telling them whether a stenting is required or whether an open heart invasive surgical procedure is required. Ladies and gentlemen, so far as clinical practice is concerned, the bottom line is trust. AI, machine learning, deep learning, all these are great to give lectures on. Trust is critical. I always mention that telemedicine, for example, which I've been a very active proponent of, is not like buying pizza online. It's not like going shopping on Amazon. Healthcare is totally different. Trust is critical, and AI has to be trusted not just by the patient, but primarily by the doctor who is going to use AI in his clinical day-to-day practice. With supporting AI tools, specialists will not be extracting information from images and histology. Now, for example, if I were to really go through an MRI, I need to go to contrast, plain MRI, contrast MRI, 3 or 4 different types of protocols, more than 400 to 500 images I need to study if I am to be sure that I'm not missing anything. Image diagnosis is a fantastic tool of AI, and AI will be able to extract the information. And I think as a clinical neurologist, I should not be spending my time extracting information, but on the other hand, I should manage the information extracted by AI. I shudder to think of the day when AI does not stop recommending what should be done, but actually implements it, bypassing the human being. On the contrary, AI will hopefully put back humanity in healthcare, allowing clinicians to focus on the patient instead of sinking in voluminous data. AI systems can assist clinicians by providing up-to-date medical information from journals, textbooks, and clinical practices to better patient care. I understand that medical knowledge is now in 2021 doubling every 2 years. It will be impossible for me even to read articles published on AI in Parkinsonism alone. It will be just impossible. So this is where AI can considerably help. A couple of years ago, I wrote an article on artificial intelligence in neurosciences from a clinician's perspective, telling the clinician, the practitioner of neurology, where exactly AI can be used in his day-to-day practice. I am absolutely surprised that this paper has been downloaded 7,716 times. This shows the tremendous interest of clinicians, I'm talking of neurologists, neurosurgeons, in the field of artificial intelligence. Again, clinicians must begin to trust the use of AI. There is so much information when making medical and diagnostic decisions that it is beyond cognitive capacities. I feel that it is a hybrid, the human and the machine, who will become much more powerful. I happen to be on several committees of the Government of India Department of Biotechnology, BIRAC, Bio-Industry Research Assistance Council. Part of my job is to evaluate proposals for funding. And during the last 4 years, we have evaluated 120 proposals for funding for the use of AI in different aspects of healthcare, including several in clinical neurosciences. This is one such project which we funded, which is now working very well. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 has come and has totally changed this. Now that we are talking of contactless medicine. So this is an intelligent drug dispensing machine, a kiosk with very little human intervention. I'm putting up this slide just to show that this is Make in India, by India, Digital India, and Make for the World. This is where India is today. Now, when we talk of AI and clinical neurology as practicing doctors, we need to be aware of the present regulatory and legal concerns. The telemedicine practice guidelines, which was issued on March 25th of this year, unambiguously, para 5.4, clearly states that AI machine learning are not allowed to counsel the patients or prescribe any medicines. At the best, as of today, a registered medical practitioner can only use it to assist him and support him. So one needs to be very clear of this. Again, the DISHA, the Digital Information Security in Healthcare Act, which is still pending in Parliament, hopefully it will be passed next year. This is going to cover some of the aspects, regulatory aspects of the use of AI in healthcare. However, we all know that nowhere in the world will regulations and legality keep up to date with the development of technology. So please remember, do not look at AI just from a computer engineer's point of view. Also look at it from the legal and regulatory aspects. The media is full of this. I've just taken from one single group, the Apollo group of hospitals alone. You can see everywhere in the media, you see we are integrating vision for use of AI in CT scan of the chest for earlier diagnosis of COVID-19, and Microsoft and Google, etc., have turned up cerebrovascular disc score, and so on. IBM Watson is now used by at least 8 to 10 quaternary care hospitals in India, and so on and so forth. But where is all this going to end? Now, I don't see the end at all. I'm only seeing the beginning. We are now not talking of AR, VR, MR, MR, mixed reality. We are talking of what is called extended reality. All this is absolutely fantastic for training a doctor, both at the beginning and as he progresses. No more cadavers. I never in my wildest dreams would have thought that I will see a slide like this where training on cadavers has drawbacks. I belong to the BC era. When I say BC, I don't mean before COVID, before Corona. I'm talking of before computers. I was the last neurosurgeon in India, the group of neurosurgeons who was trained even before the CT scan came. And to people of my generation, this looks absolutely amazing. And again, Parkinsonism, as clinical neurologists, neurosurgeons, we are more familiar with the use of drugs, and we are also familiar with deep brain stimulation, surgical procedures, etc. But how many of us know that biomedical engineers are working overtime, and FDA has already approved some of these externally fitted devices to control tremors? Obviously, this depends to a large extent on AI. The amount of information which is given back to the cloud on every specific situation, what increases the tremor, what decreases the tremor, and so on. Thousands and thousands of data points. These will be analyzed, and perhaps this will also be a part of medical care. When I was in training, there were hardly 3 or 4 books in clinical neurology. Today, you literally find hundreds of books. But I wonder whether this will continue over the next decade or so. I remember with nostalgia how I used to look for graphesthesia, 2-point discrimination. I would ask a person to have a key in his hand, close his eyes, and then identify whether it was a key or not. Scapular winging, the diagnosis of internuclear ophthalmoplegia, and critically localizing the lesion. And sometimes we would even go to the mortuary for a postmortem finding to see if the pontine infarct, which he had clinically diagnosed, was actually true. This was the thrill of clinical neurology at that time. We were all like Sherlock Holmes and Watson. Unfortunately, I understand that this is slowly dying and endangered. Clinical neurology is becoming an endangered species. A couple of years ago, I mean, obviously I'm a technology buff, otherwise I wouldn't be here. But I deliberately said in a great debate, I said, I will talk the other way and I will try to prove the limitations of technology. I'm just showing 2 slides which I used in that conference. And here you can see Steve Jobs saying, just because technology helps us solve a problem, that does not mean it was a problem in the first place. I repeat, we are developing solutions and then going and looking out for problems to come. Just quickly, 2 clinical examples. This is a young girl whom I saw in 1998. I just started stereotactic radiosurgery and I had patients referred to me for radiosurgery procedure. You can see she just has an isolated right lateral rectus paresis. The MRI at that time, June 1998, shows what on image-wise is a cavernous sinus meningioma. It was too critically placed and the risk of making her worse was significantly high. So I took a decision. I said, let's observe, let's wait and see. Her visual acuity, visual fields were normal. I have now followed up. Even last year, I had a consultation with her. I followed up now for 20 years. And the clinical judgment has proved to be right. She continues to have, of course, this minor incapacity, but then she's absolutely normal in terms of acuity fields. The lesion is not growing. This is something which native intelligence, which normal intelligence alone will be able to do. Yet another patient, 1999, a huge arteriovenous malformation occupying almost half of the brain. No clinical literature. It was just a gut feeling based on your common sense and your general knowledge. So I decided to treat this patient in 2 stages, treat the patient as if he had 2 medium-sized AVMs instead of 1 giant AVM. And in 2016, when we repeated the study 17 years later, the patient is free of seizures, he has no hemiparesis, he is leading a near normal life with a huge residual AVM in his place. We feel that the radiosurgical procedure probably, there are no data, solid scientific data, minimize the risk of hemorrhage. Anyhow, the patient is happy, we are very happy. So these are isolated cases. I hope I have a couple of minutes more. We are talking of human intelligence. Human intelligence can never, ever be replaced by artificial intelligence. Human intelligence can perceive, can take decisions, can self-learn. I can unlearn, I can relearn, as well as artificial neural network or machine learning. In fact, the whole process of human intelligence is my ability to unlearn and relearn. What do I do in real life? I learn from the past and I predict the future. I understand behavior. This is something which I feel very strongly about. At this point of time, human intelligence, AI you cannot inbuild empathy and sympathy. You do not know what the patient wants. Just because I have a procedure, should not I take into account whether the patient wants to be treated? Professor of surgery with multiple secondary deposits. I have proton therapy. Yes, it may reduce the size of the tumor, but we all know that it's not going to live for more than 6 months. So what is it that the patient wants? This has to be factored in, and all the use of AI is not going to replace this. Health applications will soon become even more popular than what it is. And I foresee that Google, IBM, Microsoft, Apple, etc. are going to be the major players in the healthcare business in just 2 to 3 years from now. The pandemic has delayed it, but nevertheless, this is going to happen. Lawsuits are going to be filed because a computer killed a patient in the absence of a doctor. Ladies and gentlemen, the destination cannot be changed, but decisions can still be made about what the journey should be like. And it needs you to be aware and take change. Will AI give weightage to what the patient specifically wants? His management choice on that day at that time, depending on socioeconomic factors, his philosophy of life, etc., etc. The ventilator settings can be readjusted with AI, yes, but I personally do not want to be on a ventilator if I reach that situation. Let's talk death. Why is India one of the worst places to die in, according to The Economist? This is because we are so dependent on technology, we hardly take into account what the patient really wants. And I think this is one thing we need. In conclusion, I just want to show you, I vaguely remember when I was 6 or 7 years old, a train like the one which you saw on the top, no, not so well crowded, but during my father's era and my grandfather's era, this was very common. And I'm sure my great-great-grandchildren, India is going to be not skyscrapers, but they're going to have super skyscrapers. The first quantum computer in India was commissioned a couple of years ago. 3D printers to create functional organs have already started in India. Flying cars are definitely, we are going to see it in India very soon, maybe a couple of years. What is the take-home message? Balance good and evil, not get rid of all evils. Good and evil are 2 sides of the same coin. You do require evil in order to do good. EBM, evidence-based medicine, algorithms, flowcharts, protocols, standard operating procedures, big data, analytics, access to Watson, wonderful. Suggestions given. But these need to be used by an empathizing clinician who alone should take the final call. EQ, emotional quotient. It has now been shown. Harvard Business Review said that when 500 of Fortune 500 CEOs were interviewed and they were asked about why they did M&A, mergers and acquisitions of companies dealing with billions, not millions of dollars, they said ultimately it was their emotional quotient, it was a gut feeling which made them decide to buy or sell a company, not the data analytics given by the IT department. This can never, ever substitute the God-given limbic system. Management plan needs to be customized, factoring history, geography, socioeconomic status, natural history, vis-a-vis different interventions and clinician competence. Does AI factor in clinician competence? The person using the AI recommendation, does it factor in clinician competence? I don't know. The clinician will adopt AI as an integral part only when there is evidence that outcomes are better. AI will never ever replace a commiserating physician. And ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude with a quotation from Sir William Osler. The good physician treats the disease. The great physician treats the patient who is the disease. Medicine is a science of uncertainty and an art of probability. Listen, listen, listen. The patient is telling you the diagnosis. This was how I was trained. I was asked to write down on my case record the clinical diagnosis based on whether the patient could have a key in his hand, whether he could identify 2-point discrimination, graphesthesia, stereognosis, joint sense, position sense, vibration sense. None of this, I think, really happened now, excepting for your DM exam. For centuries, the essence of practicing medicine has been a physician obtaining as much data about the patient's health or disease as possible and taking decisions. Time alone will tell if use of AI in neurosciences will be a bane or a boon. In conclusion, the ideal doctor in 2021 should be a combination of Sushruta, the greatest surgeon of all times, Mother Teresa, the embodiment of compassion, Krishna, who the Bhagavad Gita very clearly announces pragmatism, being pragmatic. Of course, the genius of Albert Einstein, the innovation of Steve Jobs. If you have all this together, you will really become a superman. But ladies and gentlemen, let us never ever forget the photograph on the right side. This is a photograph which every time I see it brings tears to my eyes. This was a pediatric neurosurgeon who did the world's first correction of intrauterine meningomyelocele. And after he corrected it and put the baby back inside the gravid uterus, what you see is the gravid uterus about to be sutured. You can see the little baby giving its hand, almost clenching the finger of the surgeon as if to say, thank you, you saved my life. This is a photograph which says everything. So let us not ever remember that technology is a means to an end and not an end by itself. Lars Lexell, the inventor of the Gamma knife, 50 years ago, that was the world's most sophisticated product. He said, I quote, a fool with a tool is still a fool. So all the AI in the world is not going to wipe out the tears of the patient. And I believe as clinicians, our primary goal is to deliver tender, loving care, is to make the patient feel that he has consulted the right doctor. AI should at the best be a means to achieve an end and not an end by itself. Thank you, Dr. Bindu and others for listening to me. Any questions? I'll be happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ganpati, for giving us an overview of where we stand as doctors and how artificial intelligence is probably not going to replace the clinicians. The clinical judgment is indeed very important. And there we have a couple of questions. Some of the questions are related to epilepsy, so I would probably direct them to Dr. Manga after his talk. There's a question here that from Prabhat Kumar. I have read so many research papers that claims they prepared artificial neurons. So my question is that why they do not use such artificial neuron for the treatment of neurodegenerative disorder?
I think I'm not an expert in this, but from my general knowledge of reading, we have a long way to go from the bench to the bedside. We are talking of years. We are not talking of months. So this is a very protracted, long-drawn process. I think it will eventually become, but right now we are nowhere near even thinking of a clinical test, of a clinical validation. We're still in the laboratory.
So, and if I may ask Dr. Anita, because one of the questions was missed out, we don't want to. Good morning. Are there any resources or books which beginners like me can follow to know more about AI and medicine as an engineer? I did follow a few courses online, but I think that I need a little more about the analysis to be done. Dr. Anita? Okay, I think we will now go on to, we will take that question again later when Anita is online. Now, all of us know that epilepsy is one of the most important neurological disorder, and studies have conducted on epilepsy have always shown variable results in its efficacy with variable treatment outcomes. And hence, we are here talking about what we call as precision medicine. And we wish to know how artificial intelligence can help us in epilepsy treatment and guiding us. We have none other than one of the best researchers in this field, Dr. Manga Pedersen, and I take pleasure in inviting him. And in his introduction, he is a senior lecturer in psychology and neuroscience at Auckland University of Technology, New Zealand. He's an honorary fellow at the Florey Institute of Neuroscience and Mental Health, University of Melbourne, Australia. He's also an honorary fellow at the University of Auckland, New Zealand. His research interest is to develop and validate new technologies for quantifying human brain networks using functional MRI, including machine learning and AI, graph therapy, and dynamical systems theory. And indeed, these approaches have significantly contributed to our ability to model brain dysfunction in people who suffer from epilepsy and professional athletes with mild traumatic brain injury. He has several publications with peer-reviewed research articles in reputed journals like PNAS, Journal of Neuroscience, Brain and Neurology, and has presented his excellent work at multiple international and national conferences with invited lectures at prominent universities in the US, Europe, and Asia. We're very proud to have you here because he is also currently the AI lead of the large-scale Australian epilepsy project. He has been awarded the John Milne Neuroscience Award and the American Epilepsy Young Society Young Investigator Award and the University of Melbourne Early Career Fellowship Award. We welcome you, Dr. Manga, for your lecture on using artificial intelligence for the better management of epilepsy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, and also thank you for the invitation to speak to you all today. It really is a privilege and a special thanks to you, Dr. Bindu Menon. So today I'm going to talk about essentially why we are excited about AI in epilepsy, and also why we think AI is going to enhance our care and management of epilepsy in the future. So what we will be going through today is to go briefly through what AI is. We've had some excellent talk already this morning, two fantastic talk that has preceded me, which have really set the scene for more clinical talks. And what I'm really want to focus on today is what is the use of AI in epilepsy, and really what can it be used to detect the epileptic lesions for surgery. I think that is really the aim for AI. We can use AI to treat the patients that have been hard to treat for many, many years with surgery. So we'll go through detecting the common epileptic lesions, but also the problem of detecting the more rare epileptic lesions. I will touch upon the issue of EEG and AI as well. That's another huge field in terms of artificial intelligence in epilepsy. And then I will echo some of the sentiments from the previous talk, which was a fantastic talk about the interplay between humans and machines, how important that is going to be to go forward. And now as we are at the peak of AI, of excitement, and we're probably going to go into this valley over the next 5 or 10 years, we really need to focus on the important things for our patients, which in terms of AI is to collect solid data, a lot of data, so we can make AI reproducible and generalizable across the world to treat our patients with neurological disease. So for my talk today, I will focus on deep learning. We have seen in the first two talks, AI is a massive field. It stems back from the 1950s, but I will really focus on this new development of deep learning, which you see here in the bottom bottom right corner, where we are using neural networks with several layers that is able to learn distinctive features in your data. So just a little reminder what deep learning is, even though we briefly gone through this earlier today, but repetition is the cornerstone of learning. So it's never a bad thing to repeat things a little bit. In AI, we have our input data. I've set an example here of multi-dimensional data, of high-dimensional data, which is where deep learning is really suitable. So we think about the human genome, for example, or MRI data is where we have often hundreds of thousands of elements, which can be very hard to quantify with normal statistics. This is where deep learning really shines. And this is a deep learning brain network where we have what we call a feed-forward model. This is where we train the data. We're looking for nonlinear patterns in the data. For each of these edges in the network, so when the information is transformed between nodes of layer in the network, we can relate that to the human brain. As we've seen earlier today, AI is trying to mimic human intelligence. But AI goes further than that. Even the building blocks of AI is based on the neuron. So we have what we call the artificial neuron, which is on the right of your screen here, which is very analogous to the human neuron, where the sum of all incoming edges, where you are quantifying your activation function, can be seen as the dendrites of a neuron. We multiply that by all the incoming edges from the nodes, which is analogous to the synaptic connections. And we're also adding a bias score, which is analogous to the neuron's resting membrane potential. Similar to the human brain, the AI deep learning network will then decide, do we transform information onto the next layer? And this is done with what we call a ReLU function, often in deep learning, which you see here is a nonlinear function. On the y-axis, we have a value between 0 and 10, which is the output value, and the input value on the x-axis. So this tells you whether you transform information to the next layer, much like the action potential. The action potential either fires or it doesn't fire. We then compare what we train in the brain in a deep learning network with an outcome labels. In the outcome labels, the human knowledge and the human expertise to have good knowledge of the clinical data comes into play. Because the deep learning model is only as good as the outcome label that you are computing to get your data. This is often done what we call a softmax activation function. And the reason why we're using this function, the output layer, is that it is probabilistic, and we are essentially getting a percentage probability of a different class as belonging to the labels in your data. This process is updated n number of times until you find the best possible prediction. So that's the building blocks of deep learning in terms of training a network. But as I said, the model is validated by the outcome labels, the things we want to train, the things we want to classify. And this is where outcome labels are so important. These labels are often very rudimentary, often binary, a yes or a no. For example, we can train a classifier to ask the question, for example, if you put n number of MRI scans in your deep learning network from people who have experienced their first seizure, and you want to predict, are these people likely in the future to experience another seizure? So this could be a label that can increase the certainty of diagnosis, expedite the treatment, especially in terms of choosing anti-epileptic drugs. Another critical clinical label we have in epilepsy, which I will be talking about further later in a talk, is, will surgery help me? Again, if you have wealth of MRI data in your deep learning model, you can essentially train data where you find who's got an epileptic lesion that will benefit from surgery, which will guide and optimize the treatment pathways. We can also go further than that. We know that epilepsy is associated with comorbidities such as depression, anxiety, and so forth, especially as these patients are often no longer allowed to work or drive and so forth. So there's a big life consequences for these patients. And we believe also that complex data can help ask questions such as, am I depressed? Am I likely to have psychological comorbidities and so forth, which can also increase detection and the treatment. So I have put a slide up here, which I call the promise. So this is the promise of epilepsy. And the promise of AI in epilepsy, I feel, are the epileptic lesions that are very common across our populations. An example here is from a paper in Nature Methods that have recently published. This shows a framework which allows every one of us to employ this type of AI analysis in our laboratories. This is an approach which is called NNU-Net. And what this does is essentially tuning parameters in often very complex deep learning networks, but it tunes them automatically. Essentially, what you need is the trained data and the test data. And then based on what data you have, the model will tune itself. There are a lot of pros with this approach. It allows more people to conduct complex deep learning analysis. It allows a more common reporting scheme in journals. It's easy to see what people have done, how different models are tuned across different data sets. But of course, it takes some of the human expertise and AI expertise out of the equation, and I think we still need to strive to have the best possible clinical and methodological expertise in our analysis of deep learning. But this is certainly a huge step forward in terms of making deep learning accessible for all across different data sets. And you can see how this approach works essentially for imaging data, any type of imaging data. And as you can see here in F, we can use it to detect lesions, also an MRI, in addition to a range of other medical conditions. And the big promise in terms of lesions in the brain that can have great clinical benefit from surgery is focal cortical dysplasia. This is an approach published last year where a convolutional neural network, so deep learning network, received 82.5% accuracy in detecting focal cortical dysplasias purely only by a simple hospital-grade structural MRI, especially those brain lesions that were hard to detect by the radiologist, was also detected by a deep convolutional neural network. And this is really where we think where AI is going to have a big impact of epilepsy, is to really have a high detection rate in focal cortical dysplasia, in tuberous sclerosis, in all these lesions that we know has a stereotypical pattern in terms of neuronal alterations. The challenge, on the other hand, is definitely the rarer lesion. And the reason why this is a challenge is because when you train your deep learning network, your output is only going to be as good as your input. So if you have a large data set, and most of these patients will have the common epilepsy, they will have the common lesion types, and then the misclassification of those rarer epileptic lesions, those with maybe a very odd volumetric shape or feature or location to white matter and so forth, can be very hard to classify. And this has a big implication. This actually leads to a fully good classifier for most lesions, but there are a subset of patients that will always be undetected in the algorithm in a very biased way. So this has been termed what we call hidden stratification of AI, and particularly in imaging data. This occurs in when you have a low number of subjects with a rare lesion, and obviously rare lesions are often of low prevalence. The quality of the output label, so again, the importance of having the clinical label of your data and having the clinical expertise to provide the label, because your training of the algorithm is only going to be as good as your label. Whether there are very subtle distinguishing features. We often talk about MRI negative epilepsy. How are you gonna train AI algorithms to detect things that are not detectable with the human eye? And also spurious correlation. Noise in the data obviously is gonna have an impact as well. So Oakton and Rayner and other wrote a very beautiful little paper this year on what you can do to tackle this issue, to tackle the issue of hidden stratification, and also to alleviate the problem of rare lesions in epilepsy. One of these they call schema completion. This is essentially have more subclasses of label. If your label of a rare lesion is not going to detect that lesion, have more label, try a different label to run the algorithm again to see if that picks it up. Again, it's the human expertise of the data that can lead to a good model outcome. The next approach is error auditing. This is again investigating the model, investigating the outputs, investigating the intrinsic parameters of the model. What went wrong here? Why didn't these rare lesion train properly in the data? Why was not accurate classification achieved? Is there anything we can do different? For example, in the next study, is there more information we can include about these subjects in the data? And the third approach is more data-driven. There's actually to do a follow-up analysis with unsupervised clustering. So as we've seen in these beautiful talks earlier this morning, is that we have both supervised machine learning, which I've been talking about in this talk, where you have a label. For example, will I have another seizure or not? Should I need surgery or not? That's a form of supervised machine learning. Unsupervised machine learning, on the other hand, is when you let the data to itself. You let it to self-learn. What are the distinguishing features in the data, but you don't put a label on it. So these authors found that for these rare types in your data, which was misclassified, they found a very good outcome to do unsupervised machine learning analysis on this data alone to further understand what set those subjects apart, which was not detected in a complex deep learning algorithm. So I hope I have conveyed that MRI and AI is a match made for each other. We think it's very promising. We think it's going to be of great help to epilepsy patients. It's going to expedite the surgery, and the neurologists and the neurosurgeons and the radiologists can do what they're good at, and that's treating the patients. And the AI algorithm will help in that process. The other important data type in epilepsy is EEG signals. One of the big fields at the moment is to try and classify abnormal epilepsy signals in EEG, which is going to be a very interesting field to follow, because with EEG, you have another dimension as well. You have time. So you need to build a sort of time-dependent temporal deep learning model. What I will be showing you today is the really cool paper which was published in Nature Neuroscience this year. And what the authors, Macon and others, did in this study, they recruited for epilepsy patients who had implanted electrodes over the left frontal lobe, so the language network of the brain. what the authors got these participants to do was to read sentences aloud. And the intracranial EEG was recorded during these predefined sentences. So they repeated the sentences on the EEG. And then they generated a temporal deep learning network. And they found that by using the intracranial EEG alone, so only the brain waves, they could generate text with 90% accuracy. So the EEG alone was able to generate text. So this shows how AI can help us in epilepsy and other neurological disorders, even beyond detecting a lesion or detecting abnormal activity, but also potentially therapeutic or rehabilitation implications, such as speech rehabilitation after a hemispheric dominant epilepsy surgery. So I want to spend the last couple of minutes really just iterating the great talk that preceded me, how we're going to get AI, first of all, from as was said, from the bench to the bedside, and also to make it meaningful in neurology. And that is really to leverage the human expertise and the AI algorithms. And the thing with AI as a stand and deep learning, it is the humans with domain-specific expertise that decide how these models will be integrated in clinical practice, how they're going to be interpreted, how they're going to be clinically validated, the internal validation. It's important to make a deep learning model that works on your data set. But what's probably even more important for our field at the moment is to generate a deep learning model that is generalizable across institutions. And that means having large data sets. And again, these predictive algorithms need to be optimized and tuned by human experts to increase the internal applicability of these data. So over the last 2 years, we have spent a lot of time mulling over that. We are now at the peak of AI. It's being hyped. We know what we want to do. We want to treat epilepsy. We want to really detect the lesions that are both common and rare, and we want to really treat these patients. But what stands between us and this outcome is really to have quality data with clinically expert-driven labels and annotations and a rich data set. So we last year launched the Australian Epilepsy Project, which is a $65 million project where we will collect genetics, cognition, imaging, and detailed outcomes data from 8,000 people with epilepsy, 2 types of epilepsy patients. These are the ones that have epilepsy for years and are treatment resistant and are in desperate need of surgery. The other cohort that we will collect are the people who just experienced their first seizure, to try and predict what are the phenotype between in people who experience their second seizure and then go on to have epilepsy. The data we will collect is full genetics, cognition, and MRI data, and we will integrate this data in a cloud, which will be available to everyone across the world, so the field of AI can come together and make the best possible solutions for this data set. So to conclude, I hope I have conveyed that we believe that advancements in AI technology can increase some of the diagnostic and treatment aspects of epilepsy. And also that the next thing for us now is to really focus on getting the right data with realistic clinical documentation to really deliver what AI promises. So I want to give a big thanks to the whole Australian Epilepsy Project team, which has inspired this work, particularly including Professor Grant Jackson, David Abbott, Karen Versborg, Mark Jenkinson, and Meng Law. And a lot of what I've talked about today, you can also find in one of my recent review papers in Brain Communications. So I want to thank you all again for listening, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that excellent talk. And giving us an overview of how AI is going to help us in epilepsy management. And probably, I think we are looking at an era of personalized precision medicine in epilepsy care in the near future. And that's why we have a couple of questions for you, Dr. Manga. We have Dr. John Preetham, who asks how artificial intelligence and deep learning can help us understand the stochastic, organized, chaotic signals like EEG to unravel deep brain mysteries.
Excellent question. I think that's obviously more on the methodological side of things, but I think deep learning, these temporal networks that seems to have a good performance on signal analysis really can exploit non-linearities in the data. So these chaotic signals that normal statistical analysis can't do. So I think my conclusion on that is I haven't seen it done, so go for it.
Yes, indeed. We have another question from Mr. Praveen Kumar. Can I know what is the best supervised learning algorithm to classify the EEG and the EEG signals?
Yes, I think spike train deep learning models have shown pretty promising results. So you leverage the temporal aspects of data, and really it's designed to find spikes in the temporal data, which is excellent for EEG. Again, it's really just starting to come out as publications at the moment. So there's not much literature out there as any with deep learning in epilepsy. I think we are still not having the data to answer all the questions that we want, which is what we're trying to do with these large projects. I think that's where we're at the moment, but certainly I think EEG signals is a very feasible problem for temporal deep learning models.
I would take one more question out of this. Dr. Preetham has asked that there is a phenomenal improvement in functional MRI, discovering default mode, central executive and salient networks, and switching of these canonical networks during various tasks. But functional MRI being tool of seconds and EEG with high temporal resolution, won't it be worthwhile using and testing AI and deep learning in EEG functional networks more?
Yes, I mean, it is the question between spatial and temporal resolution. I think, first of all, I think the real frontiers is the structural MRI data for the clinical point of view, but of course you use deep learning for understanding the human brain. I think both functional MRI and EEG has their role. I think EEG really can give you a directional aspect of these networks, what is driving each other, but they're never going to give you that really spatial, finite aspects of these networks, where I think functional MRI still has a role. Epilepsy is one of those diseases where we can combine what happens on the EEG with the fMRI. So that's another huge avenue, trying to bridge these scales by making the fMRI faster and the EEG slower, and then we can also use them together to see what happens in these models.
Thank you very much. Indeed, thank you for that excellent talk, and all the three speakers we have on the chat box. All our delegates have thanked all the speakers. Now we move on to our next session. And as we understand that one of the most promising areas of health innovations in the application of artificial intelligence has been medical imaging. And the number of publications in this field over the last decade has increased exponentially. And I presume that neuroradiology refers to probably 1/3 of it. May I now invite Dr. Sushmita Mitra. She is a full professor at the Machine Intelligence Unit, Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata, visiting professor in the Computer Science Department of University of Alberta, Edmonton, Canada, Meiji University, Japan, Aalborg University, and Denmark. She has received the IEE Neural Network Counseling Outstanding Paper Award in 1994, the Simpa India UNESCO Fellowship in 1996, the Fulbright Nehru Senior Research Fellowship in 1820, INAE Chair Professor in 1820. She has been the author of several books, is the associate editor of several books, organizations, more than 150 research publications and referred international journals. She is the fellow of IEE, IES, CIS Distinguished Lecturer and current chair-elect. Current research interests are data science, artificial intelligence, medical image processing, bioinformatics, and one should look out for her upcoming book, Medical Image Analysis with Deep Learning Theory and Practice. We are indeed very delighted to have Dr. Mitra among us, which she is ranked among the top 2% scientists worldwide in the domain of artificial intelligence and image processing. And we are going to have her talk on intelligent analysis of brain images. Dr. Mitra, over to you, please.
Thank you, Professor Menon, for that nice introduction. And I thank you all for inviting me to this session. So let me share my screen. So, yeah. So can you see it? Is it visible? Yeah. So today's talk will be on intelligent analysis of brain images. So it mainly deals with some of the applications that we do. Actually, I'm from the technical domain. So we focus on AI and the medical imaging aspects. However, I try to give you a brief overview of some other aspects that we haven't yet worked on, but they do hold promise. So, yeah. So, okay. So the talk will be outlined as follows. I'll give you a brief introduction to AI and then some of its applications to structural and functional neuroimaging. So before that, what is learning? So there can be two kinds of learning, mainly supervised and unsupervised. When it is supervised, we call it classification. Otherwise, we call it clustering. In the image context, we call it segmentation. And in medical imaging, we want to segment the diseased component, say a tumor and so on. So in supervised learning, there is a teacher providing you the training data where you have the observations and measurements accompanied by the output class labels. And you have some new unknown data which you need to classify based on the training you have received on the training set. It's some kind of learning that a student has with a teacher. Whereas in unsupervised learning or in clustering or segmentation, you do not have any teacher. The system learns to cluster or partition by itself based on the homogeneity of the components available in the universe. So when you want to classify between two classes or more classes, you need a decision boundary. So here, this is a decision boundary, which is very simple. It could be more complicated as you go on, and it could be concentric. It could be overlapped. So in diseases also, you have this kind of things in medical diagnostics. What is unsupervised learning? So here you have no teacher, but for a lay person, it is obvious that there are three groups because it's so widely separated. But in real life, it may not be. So what are the three partitions? They are very simply like this. So what we do, what the system does is it tries to minimize the intra-cluster distances or between object distances within a cluster while maximizing the inter-cluster distances. Now, the context of clustering could be different. So here in a family, for example, you could have different kinds of clustering. If you want to do it gender-wise, then you would group together the mother and the daughter and the father and the son. However, if you want to do it age-wise, it would be the father and the mother in the same cluster and the son and the daughter in the same cluster. So the notion of a cluster can be ambiguous, or the notion of segments can be ambiguous. So here, for example, how many clusters are there? You could say there are 2, you could say there are 6, you could say there are 4 or 3. For example, here you've got 2, Here you've got 6 and then 4. So all these are equally possible. However, depending on the context and depending on your objective, you could have different solutions. So that was the traditional learning, then came neural learning. So the concept of neural learning was based on artificial neural networks. And what are artificial neural networks? They try to mimic the biological nervous system. So as you know better than me, the brain has got a number of neurons and they are connected by dendrites and the axons. They pass some neurotransmitter and there's a potential and the neuron fires and the chemical transmitter goes. So this is a very basic understanding that I have. Of course, you know better. So now, in order to mimic that, artificial neural networks were proposed. So there are a number of neural network models which differ in finer details, but some of the common features are there. So you have heard possibly of the multi-layer perceptron, which is very famous. Then Hopfield's associative memory model, Cohen's model, radial basis function network model, adaptive resonance theory, neocognitron, and so on. So of these, some are based on supervised learning and some others on unsupervised learning. And there is one intermediate form which is called reinforcement learning. So with that, presently the trend is on deep learning. So what is deep learning? So if you consider the broad domain of artificial intelligence, which is a program that can sense, reason, act, and adapt, a subset of it is machine learning, where there are algorithms whose performance improves as it gets exposed to more data over time. Now, the crux of this problem is that you need a lot of data. And that is the main problem, because we technologists have to communicate with you doctors and our languages are different. So we need data and we need to transmit the knowledge, we need to get the knowledge in the form that we understand so that we can train the models. So that is where the challenge lies. So for machine learning, good machine learning, we need a lot of data. And particularly in India, it is sometimes pretty difficult to get annotated data. Now, what is deep learning? It is again a subset of machine learning in which multi-layered neural networks learn from vast amounts of data. So you need high performance machines and large amount of data. Machine learning, according to Tom Mitchell, is a computer program which learns from experience with respect to some class of tasks and performance measure, such that its performance improves as the training proceeds with the experience it gains. So machine learning is a kind of AI that provides the computers with the ability to learn without being explicitly programmed. So you need to focus on the development of computer programs that can change when exposed to new data. Now then we move to deep learning. So how is deep learning different from machine learning? So there are two kinds of learning in machine learning, shallow learning and deep learning. Shallow means the depth of the network is shallow or less number of layers or things like that. Whereas in deep learning, you have a very deep network and the level of training or the time of training is huge. Another major difference is that in machine learning or shallow learning, you need an expert to find out the handcrafted features. So the expert provides the features. Like, for example, in medical imaging, it could be the texture or the intensity or whatever. The expert needs to provide the handcrafted features, and these features are fed to the classifier and it learns. And the teacher provides the training and you have a classifier. Whereas in deep learning, it is more end-to-end learning. There is no expert involved to provide the features. The system learns to extract the feature based on its own, based on the data. That's why you need a lot of data and a lot of performance, high performance computing. When you have deep learning, it automatically learns. So in the first layers, let's say it learns the low-level features, then the mid-level features, then the high-level features. Ultimately, you have the classifier. For example, if you had this car in the input, it would learn at the lowest level the lines or the edges. It could be horizontal, vertical, oblique. And in the middle level, it learns to extract certain features or certain objects, let's say the wheel or some curvature and so on. And at the topmost level, it gets the entire object. As it goes higher and higher, it learns to distinguish between the different objects. Or here, for example, the different kinds of cars. So what does a computer see when you provide an image of such a vehicle? So a digital image is a collection of pixels. So these are the pixels. So this is what the computer sees, a set of zeros and ones. So each pixel is a number representing its intensity. In color images, each pixel is represented by 3 numbers for the intensity of the colors red, green, and blue. In the traditional approach, the human being, the expert is there. The human being describes objects as collection of shapes or characteristics, let's say rectangles or some trapezoid or circles and so on. So you train the system to recognize those characteristics. So this is what happens in traditional machine learning. You provide the features and you try to match these features to a new object. So you find those in the image when you have found the object. But what about these vans? You see, these vans are all different in shapes. So for example, here you have only the back view. So if you try to fit all those objects, you might face certain kind of failure. Or when you have these humans and the dog, you cannot match those objects. So you don't know what the situation is going to be. That's why deep learning is becoming popular. So how do children learn object names? So there was Professor Fei-Fei Li. She was the director of Stanford's AI Lab and Vision Lab. So she deduced that parents do not teach this by showing characteristics, but rather by naming the object or animal every time their child sees one. And maybe we need to do the same for computers. So Lee and her team launched the ImageNet project in 2007, collaborating with more than 50,000 people in 180 countries. They created the biggest image database in the world in 2009, 15 million named and classified images covering 22,000 categories. So this is a brief overview of the whole lot of images they collected and the different categories. And the ImageNet challenge in 2017 had 1.2 million images from 1,000 categories with the ground truth. And for testing and validation, they had 150,000 images. So with that brief introduction, so this is how a conventional neural network looks. And when you have the conventional convolutional neural network or deep network, this is how the structure is more enhanced. So you see the huge number of connectivity, the huge computing power that is needed, and the huge amount of data. So with that, let me move to some of the applications to neuroimaging that we have taken. So why do we need deep learning? Because there is imperfect knowledge in medicine. So you may have incomplete understanding of the biological mechanisms, imprecise test measurements, uncertainty of normal ranges for test results, simultaneous presence of more than one disease condition, missing information. So you require intelligent analysis incorporating learning. And this kind of automated analysis would be called assistive intelligence to handle big data, and you need interactive or active learning to model insufficient ground truth. So some of the challenges in manual annotation is that there is human bias inherent, tiredness comes in with huge amount of data, and for efficient processing of big data, particularly images, you need automated handling of high volume data. So the objective is to assist, but not to replace the medical experts. So given a country like India, we have huge volume of data in the remote villages. So AI could act as some kind of assistive intelligence. And we need interdisciplinary collaboration. We need accessible medical data for the computer programmers or the scientists. You need high performance computing, and you need AI. So with that, let's move on to some of the applications we have done in structural imaging. So we worked on glioblastoma multiforme images in MR, magnetic resonance. So you know about this GBM, of course, and so what we thought was that since each of the components of MRI were sensitive to certain sensitive key components of the tumor physiology, we wanted to use all the three sequences together. So here we find that in T1, T1C, T2, and FLAIR, each of these have given different intensities to the different components like edema, tumor, CSF, gray matter, white matter. So we thought we'll combine all these four. And after superposing, we have this kind of a structural difference. And the low-grade and high-grade glioma to the naked eye is not very distinguishable. So what we thought was using the concept of saliency for fast localization and detection of tumor. So what is saliency? Something which catches the eye. So in this natural scene image, you see that the bird catches the eye immediately. And I believe for radiologists also, when you scan the image, something which is catching the eye, that could be a way of looking at it. So that's what we wanted to use in this algorithm. So we had this saliency model. This was published in 2016, and we mapped it to a pseudo color model and then used that to get the saliency map and extract the tumor region. And we also included, I'm not going into the mathematical details, of course, because we don't have time. So we also introduced this concept of distance, where as you go further and further, a global aspect comes in. And as you move closer and closer, the local aspect comes in. So we superposed all these four aspects and got a kind of a superposed image, and this was the saliency component that we computed, and we were able to get the saliency map and focus on the tumor. So in case of multiple or disjoint tumors also, the algorithm was able to get the two components. And in volumetric segmentation, we did it in this manner. So this is some of the experimental results actually. And and then what is radiomix? I don't know if we have time. Do we have time, Professor Menon? Or okay, so radiomix is the high throughput quantitative image components that we have to process, and it is an interdisciplinary research area involving computer vision, medical image processing and analysis, and machine learning and deep learning. So in our lab, we've been working on diabetic retinopathy images, X-ray images. Recently, we worked on screening of COVID-19 from X-ray images, and also on the brain images. So in this radiomix study, we established that semi-supervised or some kind of automation involved in the learning was as good as manual annotation. Okay. So, well, this is personalized medicine. So radiogenomics involves an integration of the genomic components and the radiomic components, whereby you could try to non-invasively get certain biomarkers to go for personalized diagnosis. Okay. So here we participated in a challenge, which is the MICAI challenge, where we used deep learning. It is for segmentation and survival prediction in case of gliomas. So we modified the traditional UNet, which is the deep learning model for segmentation. And by introducing certain novel components, we were able to get a better segmentation around the boundaries particularly. So the model was multiplanar spatial convolutional net, and the challenge organizers provided us with 210 high-grade and 75 low-grade cases in the BRATS 18 challenge. And we introduced a novel spatial max pooling layer, and we were able to get this kind of segmentation. This was the model. And we also introduced a novel error function whereby the class imbalance could be handled in a proper manner. And we see that the class imbalance means that the tumor region had very small amount of pixels, whereas the background region had a large value. And this is where imbalance sets in, and it is a reason of improper learning. So we try to handle it through introduction of novel loss functions. And this was the leaderboard score in that challenge. We performed very well compared to some of the other top performing methods. And this was about the survival prediction, where we observed shallow learning, not deep learning, because the data was lower, smaller in size. These were some of the features that we used in terms of gray level statistics, shape, co-occurrence matrix, and run length matrix. This was some of the quantitative results. And then let me give you a brief introduction to the functional imaging that is done, typically fMRI. Of course, we haven't worked on that, but just this is in the REST fMRI, where you have no salient features. And as you move to some kind of functions, you have the functional regions marked out. And then you have to find out the connectomes, which have a lot of information. And you have to define the functional regions and learn the interactions based on the differences. So this is a model that had been developed in 2013 by these authors. And also in Alzheimer's disease, I found that some kind of work has been done. This kind of a deep network has been designed. And with that, I thank you for your patience, and I'm ready to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sushmita, for that excellent talk. We have a couple of questions, and if I may just put across, Dr. Sushmita, like the data is very huge. If we see for any, and imaging data is indeed very huge with the different modalities of investigations which are presently available. Whether it is a boon or a drawback for you while you are fitting it into your artificial intelligence systemized learning, and what is overfitting of data in this?
Data is essential, and the problem here is getting the data, because often we do not have a systematic collection and annotation, collection of annotated data. For good training, if you don't want overfitting, you need a large volume of annotated data, which is the problem. Overfitting means it's kind of a dictionary learning. That means you have less data and a huge network. It's like you're not learning any feature actually. You're just kind of mugging up things. So it's like that. So you need data and you need high performance.
Yes. Dr. Preetham has also asked, what is your personal preference between principal and independent components in neuronal imaging? Which is better suited for deep learning and AI?
So these are not related to deep learning, actually. This is from traditional pattern recognition. This is feature extraction, typically, and principal component analysis and independent component analysis. They extract certain other components. Like if you had a feature, let's say a room, if you consider a room, the dimensions of the room could be the length and breadth and height. So these are the features, the original features. So you get the volume in terms of length into breadth into height. But once you have the volume, that is one component which is in a different dimension altogether. So that volume, once you get the volume by multiplying length and breadth and height, from the volume you cannot get back length and breadth and height anymore. So volume is one number again. So the principal component analysis or the independent component analysis would be extracting some other feature, which is like the volume in the room context. So that is another component altogether from which you do not get back the original features. So that is not used in deep learning. Deep learning extracts its own features. So when you have the traditional pattern recognition or AI, you may extract those components, but then you do not go back to the original features.
Thank you. I think an intelligent analysis of the images and the proper use of the data streams.
Yes.
And what information is probably statistically significant for classification in a neuroimage, probably for a tumor? And how do you deal with the multiple heterogeneicities which you have in, as for a clinician, sometimes a stroke mimics glioma, and we have had several incidents where it has been very difficult for us. How would an AI help us to steer away from that?
You see, artificial intelligence is never better than natural intelligence. So you would need the medical expert always. So as long as the system is trained properly, the system will do that. I mean, if the human expert doesn't provide sufficient annotated data or sufficient learning to the system is bound to fail. So we need a lot of data and annotated data. So that's the main problem.
So the message across is that the data should be good enough to be fed, and the machine should learn properly.
Yes.
Otherwise, the output will be erroneous.
So we need both the people, both set of people, the medical expert and the technocrat. They need to collaborate with each other.
So I think we will move on to our next speaker. Thank you very much, Dr. Shushmita, for your excellent lecture. Stroke, as we all know, is the treatment of stroke is time bound, and we want the stroke treatment to happen as fast as possible. And for that, every second counts. We have Dr. Abhijit Das with us, who is a consultant neurologist at the Walton Center NHS Foundation Trust, Liverpool, UK. He's a neurologist and a serial inventor with interest in neuroengineering and non-invasive brain stimulation. His current focus is on the application of AI in neurological practice, and he has been the recipient of several awards: the Glow Health Tech Prototyper Award, the Best Poster Award at the 2020 conference at London, UK, the Chikitsa Healthcare Innovation Award from the Indian Chamber of Commerce, the Infocom Future Leadership Award, the Tata Social Enterprise Challenge, the Young Investigator, Best Abstract, and the Residence Research Scholarship. To his credit, he has multiple patents in the field of neuroengineering and multiple international publications as well. And Dr. Abhijit is going to highlight to us a very important aspect and on the artificial intelligence applications in ischemic stroke. Dr. Abhijit, over to you, please.
Thank you, Professor Menon, for your kind introduction. Hope I'm audible to everyone.
Absolutely, absolutely. Clear enough.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So this is indeed I am very glad to participate, and I'm really indebted to Professor Menon and the organizers to invite me in this conference. And I'm really glad with the important aspects regarding use of AI in the medicine that we are discussing so far. So I'll just add my briefly the issues in one field where AI is probably one of the area in medical science where AI is routinely being implemented for routine clinical care, and which is in the area of the ischemic stroke. So again, going back briefly, but I think now this description is a little bit superfluous with what we have learned already. So artificial intelligence, as we know, is just a subfield of computer science aiming at emulating the human cognitive process, just to teach the machine to think as humans. And it has got different flavors, from machine learning to robotics to self-driving cars to speech and text recognition to the decision tree-based recommendation systems that we see every day in Netflix or Alexa or Siri listening to our voice and acting autonomously. But for this today, an AI-based stroke will mainly focus on machine learning. And machine learning is one of the again, subdomain of the artificial intelligence, that allow computers to learn from examples without being explicitly programmed. So the computer learns by themselves, and in them, a specific subcomponent is again in deep learning. And Professor Mitra has excellently gone through the entire process of deep learning and machine learning, so I'll not go into details. So again, machine learning has their own subtypes, like supervised learning, where classification and regression are used, unsupervised learning, mainly aimed at clustering, and reinforced learning, where decision, and then the deep learning is a subpart of the machine learning. Now, why AI is important? Professor Ganapathy touched earlier on this issue. Now, everywhere we're seeing AI is talked about AI day in and day out, because indeed we are in the fourth industrial revolution, and AI is causing this fourth industrial revolution. If you go back to the history, it started in 1765, the first industrial revolution, when the steam engine was invented and regularly implemented. Then we had the second industrial revolution in 1870, when electricity was introduced for the industrial use, and the third industrial revolution, again around 100 years' time, when we used the automated production, robotics came into the industry, and the informational technology took place. Then probably within the next 50 years, we have half the time, we're coming into the domain of AI for the fourth industrial revolution. And indeed, AI is one of those general purpose technologies, or GPTs, which, like steam engine, like combustion engine, like computer, internet, the IT infrastructure, will permeate all the levels of our daily life and going to change them, which we can't think how they're going to change them. Their unpredictability. The unpredictability is a core component of the general purpose of technology. We really don't know now how AI is going to change our lives and how we are seeing better. So stroke. Stroke is one of the medical subspecialty with the earliest adoption of AI, and is widely adopted now and being used routinely. This is because stroke is the leading cause of acquired disability worldwide, and it has a definitive time window. So whenever someone coming with an acute stroke, we have around, say, 4.5 hours to 6 hours. Currently, we're expanding the window a little bit up to 8 hours to 12 hours, but we should do everything within this window period. If we miss it, it is gone. Either the patient dies or lives with a lifelong disability. And it needs a rapid interpretation of neuroimaging. You have to interpret it in then and there and activate your system to do something. And in 2018, two trials published in NEJM, along with the other few trials, that changed the landscape of stroke management. Within a single year, we came from the thrombolysis to the domain of thrombectomy, and it's a completely different ballgame. So without giving the medications, you need to shift a patient to a specialist center where there are people skilled enough existing, the interventional neuroradiologists, who can take out the clot, because now we know in definitive subtype of strokes, they change the management completely. And this area was completely amenable for the image analysis, because we don't need the data that need curated, because the image analysis, the image is some kind of curated data already existing. And the computer vision analysis, because of our background in image analysis, we had the expertise. So that's why AI came into stroke so rapidly. So why do I need AI? Because the first thing, I need to reduce the inter-rater variability in the image interpretation. So my first question I ask, is this a stroke? Or that's a subtle hypodensity in the CT scan that may be due to something else. Then I need to identify whether this is an emerging large vessel obstruction, or does this patient need thrombectomy? Because again, this is the main question we're asking now. So if this patient needs thrombectomy, I'm going to shift this patient out, or I'm going to call out to another subspecialty with their interest. We need more people, the entire lab to be arranged. That's a huge another ballgame that starts, which is time consuming and also labor intensive. And before I go there to decide on intervention or something else, can I quantify the benefit of intervention? This is the most important thing. Why I am going into this huge venture? Why I am putting someone to harm's way? Because all these interventions has their own risk. There is risk of bleeding, risk of dying. So why I am putting someone on this harm's way? This is because, again, we're coming back to the old medical, that's primum non nocere. We should not do any harm, but we are putting someone in harm's way. So we have to have a clear understanding of the risk. So the risk of the stroke without the intervention, is it much higher than the intervention? Then we are going this way. So can I quantify the benefit of intervention and predicting the patient outcome? So all these questions are being answered in a time-bound manner. I need all those answers within a very few minutes. The scan is done, and AI is helping us to get it done. So the scope of AI in stroke starts from the onset. When it starts having the image, and the onset to get the image, we can have this large vessel occlusion, aspect score, correlation, salvageable tissue. Whether it is hemorrhage, then it is a different thing. We are not going for the other pathways. The lesion volume, again, hemorrhage, short-term outcome. lesion, because the lesion and the core infarct is the highly determining factor of the outcome, then functional outcome. So from the initial image, the AI leaves us a huge scope where we can interpret and get things done better with the AI in tow. And coming back to the deep learning, I think it is already dealt very nicely, because deep learning is so important, because we are looking at the deep learning based image analysis, and we'll talk in much detail later. And this is one of the specific supervised machine learning where we use artificial neural network. We discussed much earlier in much detail. So these are the input layer, hidden layers, which the different layers, they adjust for different aspect of the data and the information of the output layer. Then I'm copying it from Dr. Peterson's paper, who is already showed it earlier. So the artificial neural network, the main thing is that the feed forward and also back propagating. So the network themselves keeps on learning whether they're matching the input and output. And with this kind of input image, we have different convolutional layers and fully connected layers. We can, whether it is a hemorrhage or infarct or a neoplasm. The more we train the network, the more it learns. So I will not go into details because there are beautiful review articles available on this topic now, but I'm just showing it. This is a very busy slide. I'm showing it just to show the amount of research that has gone into AI in stroke. Started in 2011, the first paper, Tang et al. Came, where the computer detection of acute ischemic stroke without CAD, and compared the two radiologists. And at even that time, the first time, the radiology residents and the radiology specialists, it was quite a very good outcome, and it improved slowly. Progressively it improved. Then the main use of AI came with the aspect score. Aspect is a Alberta stroke aspect score. We can find out the hypodensity in the CT scan, how much infarcted tissue is already there. And imaging has been perfectly useful, the AI-based imaging, to identify the aspects. And the E aspect, the automated aspect estimation algorithm, is already very well established here. And now we know the AI can detect large vessel obstructions from the CT angio very well. We can look at the sensitivity specificity. And infarct volume, which is now the core interpretation of the AI pathway. So, and it can detect quite well, sometimes better than the human. And also increasingly, the hemorrhage detection is gaining. It's somehow counterintuitive why hemorrhage is lagging behind the other detection, because all the software is introducing the hemorrhage detection software quite late. But we need to understand that the machine, because hemorrhage is often very well marked in the naked eye, we can see it immediately that there's a hemorrhage. But for the machine, because it lacks the, what we can say, common sense, it is very much difficult to understand, because you need to undertake the use of context, while it is seeing the hemorrhage or not. So it is very difficult for machine to identify this hemorrhage. Now, what we are doing in the real world in stroke imaging? Again, coming to my previous questions, is this a stroke? Does this patient need thrombectomy? Can I quantify the benefit of intervention? Now, let us come and see what do we really do. So this is from the Brainomics software. So this is one of the patient coming with a, say, within 1 hour history of some right-sided weakness, mild breech problem. One of our stroke scale is NIHSS, which is around 8 to 9. And now have the plain CT scan. Now we can say there is mild hypodensity here compared to this side. Now, should I go ahead thrombolize? Previously it was very easy. Is the patient for thrombectomy? With this CT scan, very difficult to understand. Now with our advanced tools, this is an E-aspect application. We can see these things, aspect score is slightly higher. So there is some evidence of infarction is going on, which the AI can identify probably more than our naked eye, and also from the untrained eye. So this is very important in the peripheral hospitals. Then next way, the AI can detect from the CT angio there is a large vessel occlusion. So we have detected an LVO, which again switches the category from the area of thrombolysis to thrombectomy. Now I need to activate the entire system for thrombectomy. If I am in the periphery, I need to arrange the patient to be sent to a central institution where the patient will be able to get the service of interventional neuroradiologist. The entire team to be activated so the patient can be transferred, the support system activated and everything. Fortunately now worldwide, we are having increasingly the stroke network set up, the ambulance system set up, and they are very much sensitive to these things. Now I have identified LVO, but can I quantify it? Okay, here I can quantify it. The red is the area of the infarcted tissue. The yellow is the area at risk, or the penumbra. So we can see if at this moment, this patient, the red area has already died. But if I don't do anything, the entire yellow area is going to die. The risk of not doing anything is much more higher than going ahead with the thrombectomy or the intervention procedure. So now I know clearly that I have a definitive risk-benefit ratio, which is beneficial to the patient, so I can go ahead with the thrombectomy. This is the benefit of AI, showing everything so immediately and simultaneously. And now, how would we do it in the current workflow? So these are some of the best already available softwares that routine use. Of them, we use the Brainomix in the UK very frequently. We use it routinely now. Rapid AI is another thing. Viz AI also received FDA approval this year for their software. The Brainomix, Rapid AI, Viz AI are the three predominant softwares in this domain. Now, this is from the ADOC, one of the first thing, but almost all softwares now have copied their interface, so them similar. So when I'm at home, I receive we have the apps on our smartphones. Now, when I open, I get an alert. I open, I can go through the different patient data. I can see how the non-contrast CT, the CT angio, and their CT perfusion already interpreted. And then I can communicate with my stroke members in UK. We have usually the stroke nurses or the registrars there. We can communicate with them. Okay, now activate the inform the neurointerventionist. So this is one of the Brainomix that we routinely use. The key thing is Brainomix is that immediately from CT perfusion, it can give it will point out to the area of identified larval vessel obstruction. You don't have to search for it. The next thing, it hides out how the collateral circulations, which is a huge marker for the stroke outcome, and the which marker that we look when you're looking for the stroke intervention. You can see here the collaterals is much more less compared to this side. So it has already highlighted. Next, it will show the area of the perfusion deficit that is identified. So this is how Brainomix shows penumbra. Rapid AI shows penumbra in a different way. Then is the next Rapid. So Rapid also similar thing. They have all have their smart phone-based app, and they shows out almost a similar thing. So comparison between Rapid, Brainomix, Viz AI is different, that in addition to showing all these things, it also gives an alert to the system. Okay, this patient has LVO identified. It alerts the system that this patient is candidate for thrombectomy. It puts out alert to the entire system, so you don't have to do anything. Now, limitations. Not everything is there already. The main issue is the black box issue. How the neural networks are working and how they're finding out to which they make the decision is unclear. We cannot understand. I think Professor Mitra found it very well. When you have a dimension, you cannot go back to it. So the AI and their ANNs have found out a dimension, this is that. So we cannot go and find out why did they took the decision. But this is very important and medical and ethical implication, because as humans, if something goes wrong, and sometimes the court may ask you, why did you do it? And this is a very important issue. This is a very issue of accountability, medical ethics, that why need we do it? And here, one area is coming to sort out this issue is called saliency maps or the heat maps. I'm going to discuss it later. Another issue is always important in AI is the overfitting, which Professor Mitra earlier told very well is the dictionary learning. So when you put a data and your model overfits it, it also takes the noises as the signal. So as if someone has written, someone preparing for a questions, but he has read very well, but only read about 10 questions that are about to come in a next examination. But if something comes from a different question bank, someone gives 2 or 3 different questions, you're unable to answer them. The similar to it, the overfitting the AI model, when in real life it fails. Another main issue, which we are also find it somewhat disturbing, that there is no head-to-head trial among all leading softwares. So we really do not know if what Rapid is identifying as penumbra and Brainomix identifying as penumbra are the same or not. So whether, because the Rapid has a head start compared to the other software, because Rapid software is used to the main trial that enabled us to go ahead with the endovascular thrombectomy. So RAPID had a head start. So we know based on RAPID, endovascular thrombectomy does well. But is it same with Penumbra or the Brainomix? We do not know yet. So coming to the salience and attention map issue. So this is one of the beautiful things. So it, coming from this thing. So where we can see a color-coded class activation attention map. So this is an data from the subarachnoid hemorrhage. So this is the area which is the bright white, ideally bright white in the CT scan, and the machine is showing that it took decision mainly on this part. So the heat map, the red is going on this part. So I know to be sure the machine made something right. Had it been put it on here, I know this is a bone which is also white. So the machine has not, So the machine has not looking into the bone, but it has looking rightly into the bleeding part. So with a salience attention map, I can be really assured that the machine did the right thing. Now implementing routine stroke and stroke care. This is based on the previous studies that were shown earlier. And you can see somewhere for the aspect and other, the AI sensitivity was somehow equal or better to human sensitivity. And the specificity, again, accuracy, almost similar. Now we have seen from the other domains in medical science, sometimes they can surpass human beings, especially one research published in Science that shows nicely, especially for skin cancers, they can surpass untrained doctors. Similarly, the sensitivity specificity of the AI in specific context, not the general thing, because machine doesn't have the common senses. So they have to be told what need to be done in a very narrow way. Only then they can perform well. They're almost, if well guided, if supervised, they are coming close to the human understanding. They're doing well. So this is very beneficial. So now we can develop stroke in a stroke network. It's very useful. You don't have experts everywhere. Don't have imaging interpretation done immediately by the neuroradiologists, say depth of the night. Most of the hospitals don't have the neurointerventional radiologists at them. So it is very useful to have a machine doing it. But again, Dr. Ganapathy touched this called the hype cycle. So are we there yet? So a hype cycle goes in different way. Innovation trigger, then a peak of inflated expectations. So I think we are here. I agree with Dr. Ganapathy, we are here. We're at the peak of the expectation, but soon we'll find out some deficits in them. Then in some way, we'll realistically go up. We'll go back up again in a good way and find out what they're able to do, what they're able not to do. Now the future direction, where are we going? We need to have those head-to-head trials of different software very soon. And the studies are ongoing. We'll probably soon have some good data. Another issue, and Dr. Pasaden also touched on this issue, that error monitoring and auditing. We need to find out when the machines are missing. We have started the process in our hospital recently, where we have found out that sometimes the machine that misses out on gross large vessel obstruction. We need to find out why machine made this decision. Unfortunately, all of these are being done by the the commercial available softwares. We don't have they work as black boxes. So we don't really have why they're making these decisions. So here we need to work with computer scientists, because they need to tease out the different layers. We need to find out, we can provide them the error data and they can find out why machine is making a mistake. Again, the same paper was previously mentioned by Dr. Pasaden, that the hidden stratification issue. So what we teach has its own often hidden stratification already there. We need to overcome them. Again, this overfitting issue. And the other thing is that we are now only focused on the image identification. We have not fully utilized the machine, the artificial intelligence based on rule-based decision tree protocols. So in future, the image will fit into a decision-making protocol, and the machine will tell us whether to go ahead with the thrombolysis or not. Slowly, we are getting there. So thank you. Ready for the questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abhijit, for that excellent overview, and on a very important topic as well, because all of us understand the disability that the stroke can have, and the rapid triage that we need to do that. As you have rightly pointed out, there is indeed a paucity of RCTs, and one needs to properly have a look at it, because at that dissolution stage, we should not be having a lot of drawbacks. We should still be having a lot of good things in hand. Probably I should say that it's not a perfected source at this point of time. There could be some imperfections, and the individual who is looking at it should still be have his clinical decision rather than entirely depending upon the AI. We have a couple of questions here, Dr. Abhijit, for you. Dr. Shivakumar asks, how can we utilize AI in vascular dementia?
Okay, so this is a completely different thing. So vascular dementia, AI can be utilized in multiple ways. So again, the first thing is that we can use, it is very difficult to use it now because vascular dementia involves not only the imaging, it involves the clinical parameters. Again, the clinical parameter is the curated data. Like someone like a neurologist would elicit the data, curate it, and feed it into the system to identify. Then we can use the imaging data, and the imaging data can one ecosystem or the decision making, and that can feed out of the other things with the clinical parameters of the phenotypic. So together we can use in future in a decision tree algorithm to find out which patients is matching into vascular dementia, and it can be only done in a long-term trial-based manner where we can find out again which patient match into vascular dementia versus non-vascular dementia. Some trials are going, I know, but not entirely. I'm not aware of any large-scale studies looking into it because it not only the imaging, some imaging-based studies has been done, but vascular dementia, because there are so much confounders in vascular dementia because as a category in itself, there's so much overlap with the other dementia subtypes. So we need to have a long-term trial to say, to classify really into them vascular versus non-vascular dementia. But this is a very interesting area of application.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Rajesh Pandita also asked that, like in epilepsy, we have certain tools and devices to know whether the person has got a seizure. Do we have AI-enabled device that can alert to the person that she is going to have a stroke in the few hours? And how is AI also going to help us to create awareness? Because all of us know that prevention is a tool rather than diagnosing and treating it. So could you throw some light on this?
Yes,
please?
so if you look, that prediction is something, again, it is such a, so many parameters goes into, and anything can go wrong. The scale of dynamics, and also prediction is somewhat related to the entropy because one system shifts to the other system permanently, which cannot come back. So here, having something to predict something is very difficult. Again, so the perfect moment someone is having a stroke is probably $1 billion question now. And our systems are at present, we can say we are not there yet. We are going there, but it will again need a huge amount of data that need to be analyzed. And then we can say predict something is going to be happen. Even EEG for seizure, it has its own drawbacks. It has own false positive, false negative. Similar will apply in stroke as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abhijit. At any point of time, has the human intelligence in your practice has questioned the artificial intelligence in the neuroimaging in your patients?
Oh, definitely. Because
that's nice.
Yes, because if you see all the softwares, they mandate it has to be supervised. So very often what they do, they put the map in the wrong direction. We have to correct it. So when they interpret one area, we have to correct it because, again, machine intelligence lacks common sense. For us, common sense, that's a skull. We should not look into it. For machine to understand that is a skull, he should not look into that skull part, showing some increased signals is very difficult. And that's generalized intelligence has not come yet. So people talk about the area of singularity when such generalized intelligence come into AI. Probably that time AI is going to, which Stephen Hawking has predicted, that AI is going to kill the humanity, yes. Something like that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abhijit. If you could stop sharing your screen for me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that excellent talk. Now we go on to our next speaker. All of us would have heard of stereo vision, that is extraction of 3D information from the digital images. And we all of us know that human organ is an extremely complex organ, and surgeons really have to guide their vision tools to see that organs sometimes might be racked and kept in one behind the other. So we have with us today Dr. Raghavendra, who is the Assistant Director of Academics, Associate Professor, Department of Instrumentation and Control Engineering from the Manipal Institute of Technology, Manipal. He has a PhD in Manipal Academy of Higher Education, MTech in Microelectronics and Control Systems, and a BE of Electronics and Communication. He has more than 35 plus journal articles with a citation of 1201 with an H index of 19 and ITEN index of 28. To him, he has several patent and invention awards, Method and System for Efficient Stereo Machining in 2014, invention awards for multiple object detection and tracking for augmented reality from Intellectual Ventures USA 14, hybrid correlation for illumination intravariant stereo vision from Intellectual Ventures USA 2013. Welcome, Dr. Raghavendra. Thank you for being with us. And Dr. Raghavendra is going to talk on his specialty topic, the role of stereo vision for robotic surgery. Over to you, Dr. Raghavendra.
Yeah, thank you, madam. Thank you for your nice introduction. Start with my topic. It's role of stereo vision in robotic surgery. Yeah, whether the slide is visible to you?
Absolutely. Yes, it is.
Thank you. My topic is role of stereo vision in robotic surgery. We are a group of people at MIT. We technical people as well as clinical people, especially from neurosurgery department. And we are working on intracranial hematoma, intracranial pressure, as well as we are working on 3D reconstruction using stereo vision. So our intention is to create a 3D model, or in a simple word, it's the missing term, what we capture image when we capture using a 2D camera, that's a dimension Z. So our intention is to get back that Z so that it will help in many applications, including clinical surgery. So this is the content, and why only 2D, stereo vision basics, application of stereo vision, and we'll see the future healthcare system. And as we all know, these are the major imaging modality we used to use in our clinical practice: computed tomography, CT, MRI, ultrasound, X-ray, PET-CT, and slowly we are introducing a stereo camera as well. So this is the basic construction of a stereo camera. It looks like two cameras placed side by side. And the best example for this is human binocular vision, as you all know better than me. It's a binocular vision where we have two eyes, so it's observing the same scene, and so that something will be created in our brain, which will help us in gathering some information regarding dimension Z. The best example is hold your finger in front of your eye and close one eye and open another eye. Next time you close this and open another one, and do this continuously, then you feel like your finger is moving, right? So the distance from my finger to my eye is very close, so that I feel like that the displacement is very large, right? So if I hold a finger a little away from my eye, and if I do continuously the same thing, I feel like my finger is moving with a little distance. So this is nothing but there is some displacement or some point from left eye to the point or object, which is my finger, and also from my left eye there is another point, right? So the coinciding point of these two, the left and right lines, which creates a dimension Z, right? Similarly, I can give you another example of if somebody is throwing a ball towards you. What you could do is close one eye and try to catch it. So definitely you feel like we are not comfortable, or you're not comfortable in catching that ball with the one closed eye. So if you open both the eye, you will feel like there is something which is directing you to catch that ball, which is nothing but the dimension Z, right? So whatever you do to capture a scene, definitely we are losing one dimension, which is Z. So our total objective is to get back that Z, which we are missing when we capture an image. That's the total is a stereo vision system. So how can I do that, right? How can I get back that Z which I have lost during capturing an image? So the easiest way is to arrange your camera in such a way that it mimic the human binocular vision. So what we have done, or in late 90s, they have generated one stereo camera by placing two ordinary cameras side by side with some calibrations, right? The one example is there in the present slide. It looks like two surveillance camera placed side by side, right? Now the question is it sufficient for me to get back that result? No, definitely no, because along with this placing of the camera, I need a lot of other things to do, which is called a calibration. So these are the stereo camera which commonly used in surveillance systems. Like Bumblebee 2 or Bumblebee 3 are the very popular company which is going to manufacture this stereo camera. And in this slide, you can see some of the camera or a stereo camera used for robotic surgery, where you can see in the top image, you can see there are two lens placed here, which will help you to see the exact position of the Caesar or whatever it is from the camera, so that it should not go and touch any human organ. Similarly, this is another one, and this is another one, stereo camera, and this is another one commonly used for clinical surgery or clinical practice. So what are the advantages of stereo vision in robotic surgery? So it gives an additional information on another dimension, that is Z, which will help you to understand or to get an information about what is the exact distance from the maybe a catheter or whatever it is. If you are taking any clinical practice where you know a catheter distance, you will come to know about the distance from catheter to the exact human organ. That is the one advantage. Another one is gives precise structural orientation. I will show you some of the slides where I can show you some of the images what we obtained using the stereo camera, which gives an orientation of the structure or the human organ, so that you'll come to know whether it's a uniform or non-uniform structure. And also it helps in needle capping, knot tying, needle threading, etc. What you do in your day-to-day clinical practice. So we'll see how it helps in different directions. So in basics, what is stereo fundamentals? Stereo fundamental is nothing but observing a scene, that is P, from two different viewpoints, that is Q and LQR. Just imagine these two are your camera, and these are the camera centers, and observing at the same point, that's P. And in the right image, you can see there is one line drawn from your left to an object, and there is another line from your right to object, and there is a displacement between or distance between two camera also connected in this way. And the below image is a type of the camera which we really use for our surveillance system, and it is not going to be used for a medical purpose or a clinical purpose. But in the surveillance, we are going to use this camera, and this is the structure of the camera, where we have a distance that is 47.4 mm of width, and 36 mm of height, and 157 mm of the displacement between two cameras. This is one sample image captured from my human eye. It's a fundus image captured using a stereo fundus camera, where you can see we'll get two images. One is a left and another one is a right. But most importantly, you can observe there is some displacement in the position of your retina. For example, you just see the distance from this border to this edge is less compared to the distance from this border to this edge. That shows the displacement of this, because as you know, I have shown you one image where we have displacement between two camera, which results in this kind of displacement. We'll see this, what is the reason for this displacement in the later slides. So this is a sample images especially taken during medical surgery. It's from one of my collaborator, because we have not used this in our lab, because we are still working on, in our lab, we are working on synthetic data so that we can apply it for medical images. And also this is one of the stereo fundamental where we can take a part of a ROI. ROI is a region of interest using a stereo camera. And the leftmost one are the left and right image, because as you know, if I take an image using stereo camera, I'll get two images. One is left and one is right. So this is some of another examples of maybe a liver. And this is a fundamental of our stereo vision system. where you can see I'm observing a scene XW from two different viewpoints. One is X and then one is Y, or we usually call it as a right camera and the left camera. And there is, I'll draw a line from the right camera to the object, and there is another line from left camera to the object, and it creates a triangle, right? So when we have a triangle, we can work with this, and the mathematics will come into picture so that I can get back this ZW. This is the one we really losing when we capture an image using a camera. So again, there is another dimension called a B. It's nothing but distance between two camera centers, that is B. If I know this B and the focal length of the camera, I can easily identify this ZW. It's a depth. So again, if I capture a scene from using this camera, I'll come to know about this orientation, this type of orientation. So if this is a orientation, I cannot find out any of the same component in an image. So I have to go for a image rectification. Image rectification is nothing but aligning your two images, what you captured from left and right camera, properly, so that your first row of your right image is first row of your left image, so that any point which I need to search from a right image, I need to search in the same row. So for example, you can take upper images where you can see the distance from this floor top to the end and floor top to the end here is different, right? So once I do the rectification, you can observe this line is almost the same, right? This is the same. It's a rectification process. Then if I want to observe some component from here, I need to search along that row. No need to search in a column wise. It's called also called as a coplanar one. In this image, you can see this is a left image and this is a right image. Think that this is a region of interest or any human organ if you want to take it in a clinical side. So in a left image, it is positioned somewhere towards right. But when you take a right image, the same region of interest is positioned towards the right? So that means there is a displacement of x minus d max. D max is this is the actual position of a region of interest in the left, so that I can observe this much distance between right image and the left image. The same object is located in different places in right and left image. Now, is there any way I can find out this distance so that I can find out the actual distance? For example, if I go back and if I recall my, if you recall my example of holding your finger very close to your eye, there will be large displacement. If you hold your finger a little far away from my eye, there will be a lesser displacement. So that I can conclude one thing. If an object is very close to my eye, so then there will be a large displacement, or this displacement is inversely proportional to the distance. So large displacement, less distance, less displacement, large distance. This is inversely proportional to each other. This is a concept we required for generating a 3D. So this is another example. You can see this highlighted part of a left image is located somewhere along this row in a right image that I need to search. As you all of you know, pixel by pixel comparison may create a lot of redundancy, so that nearby area we take and we search in the same row. It's called a neighborhood searching method in a computer vision. So that whenever for example, if you take this image, this statue is very close to the camera compared to the bureau which is there at last, right? So that this definitely, when a distance is minimum, there will be a large displacement. So displacement is large, so that this is highlighted in bright. Similarly, this lamp is even closer to me than this statue, so that it is even brighter. And so that, and another one, there is one table. That table is also having little distance compared to this statue, so that with some gray color. And also we have a tripod here. It's little far away from the camera, so that dark gray. And the bureau is far away from the camera, so it's a completely black. This gives a concept of this displacement is inversely proportional to my distance. So this is something which we have created in our lab. Some of the disparity. It's called a disparity. Once I find out the displacement, it's called a disparity. So this disparity tells us about how far your region of interest from the camera. So this is, I'll come back to the clinical or medical field, where we have two situations, where one is a laboratory database, another one is a intraoperative database. So in a laboratory database, you can see we have a proper lighting condition and we have an object, and we have captured these from a stereo camera, and this is a 3D reconstruction. You can see a smooth surface is created here because we have a proper lighting condition. But if I take a actual practical condition or intraoperative database or a situation where it's very difficult to maintain a proper lighting condition, because a lot of things are moving here and there, so that I cannot create a clear surface like this. You can see the surface which we have created using actual or a real-time data. It's not smooth. So a lot of research is going on in this area to smoothen this and get the clear surface. And here another example, you can see it's a left image and the right image taken from two different viewpoints. And this has created a stereo disparity. Here also you can see the surface is not uniform. There are a lot of structures, unstructured or non-uniform structure observed. We need to clear that. And here a 2D feature track, once I create this, or if I get this 2D images, I can directly go for an AI-based feature extraction or feature tracker system, so that I can use a machine learning and I can predict a lot of uncertainty or region of interest or some anomaly on the surface. So this is another example of disparity computation of medical images. Still, I can say there is no uniformity on the surface. And there's another example of I think brain CT, where you can see the surface is created here again. It's having but the condition under which these images are taken are proper, so that I can see somewhat better surface created using 3D. So this is another example of a complete brain structure maybe. And you can see some of the 3D structures created using stereo disparity. And this is a refined one. You can see there is a refined or a smooth area compared to this. And again, the same thing obtained using disparity. And again, this is the refined one after a lot of computations. And this is another scenario where you can take out images of human retina using a stereo fundus camera. And here you can see we have two images captured from this device, and a lot of processing has been done on these images. And finally, you can see there is a surface created in this way. This is the actual disparity. So if you observe, we can see a lot of challenges involved in this disparity computation compared to real-time data, synthetic data. The first thing is a depth discontinuities, because there may be a lot of other organs which are placed next to this organ, so that there will be a large depth discontinuities, which will limit our proper reconstruction of the surface. And another one is a change in illumination condition really gives a lot of challenge in creating a surface. And another one is a change in exposure condition, which is also creating a lot of issues. And in our lab, we have done some issues for this depth discontinuities. This is mainly because of a fixed window size or a neighborhood processing, what I have mentioned earlier. And we have done some shape adaptive neighborhood processing methods, and we have got patent for this. And this is a way we can avoid that depth discontinuity issues. And this is the way we have developed it. It is the shape of the window is not fixed. It's purely depend on the region of the image what we are selecting for the processing. And this is the actual shape. we created. You can see it's a completely irregular, and it continuously changes based on the intensity of the image, or the region of area which we have selected for a operation. And another one is using a lighting direction. In these two images, you can see the direction with which light is exposed or projected on this subject or object is different. In this direction, it is in this way, and in this image, it is from this direction. But you can see a lot of other conventional methods fail to reconstruct the surface, but the obtained algorithm in our lab is creating little better idea. And another one which we have developed in our lab, again, it's a change in exposure, and you can see the last image is better than the existing one in terms of a smooth surface. And the best resolution what we have obtained is taking invariant image from the original image and process it. It's going to be a very helpful method. And also some non-parametric local transform, which is called sensor, the rank transform also we have used to reconstruct this surface in a proper way, so that you can see some uniformity in the surface. And some additional details for disparity computation are once you create this surface, it gives a lot of other information like depth measurement, surface identification, depth layering, measuring area of the organ or a tissue, and multidimensional projection. What we require in especially clinical or taking decision in clinical trials. So these are the other advantage once you create a depth discontinuities or a depth measurement or the disparity measurement. And I'll show you some of other results what we have done in our lab. So this is a surface identification what I have mentioned, because this is the results what we have obtained on other synthetic data, and we are now working on applying these techniques on a medical data. So this is the way we can separate the people using this disparity estimation. You can see people on a line so that the complete portion of the object is not visible, but we can separate them using this surface or a depth. So here also we can identify the surface, and we can separate the people using surface or the disparity. There's another advantage called a depth layering, and the same thing can be adopted to medical images also. And another one, measuring area of the organ or a tissue, because we'll come to know about the complete surface of the scene, so that I can calculate the area with which, or the area covered in a scene by this organ. And this is a multidimensional projection also we have created. It's a beautiful technique. Though we have captured the scene using perspective geometry, but using mathematics, I can project it from the top so that I can go back and see them with the separation. So you can see in this image, these people are not separated completely. There are some occlusion, but mathematically I can project it like as if I'm observing this scene from the top, so that I can separate them. And similarly, I can separate them with the perspective geometry, so that it will help me to segregate nearby organs and take only the region of interest and process it. And this another thing combined, and we have segmented it, and we have reprojected it to a perspective geometry, so that we can separate them. And again, I can observe the exact chest length, so that I can separate them. These are the things we have experimented in our lab, and we are in the process of applying this technique to medical images for a better diagnosis, as well as we are applying it for finding a volume of intracranial hematoma. And we have taken images, and we are in the process of constructing its volume. As you already know, by 2 is one of the key method you're using in a clinical practice, and we are trying to develop a better system than ABC by 2 to get a proper volume for better diagnosis. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. You can reach me with this details.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raghavendra, for highlighting to us one of the very most important tool which a surgeon would want for him in his operation theatre, because the localization of a brain lesion and along with that damage, preventing of damage to very critical structures is a basic principle of any surgical practice, and especially for a neurosurgery. What would you feel, Dr. Raghavendra, are the present drawbacks of the present stereo vision which you have? And is the picture acquisition which the stereo vision would capture while we are talking about neurosurgery would be good enough for the surgeon to navigate and undertake the procedure? Or would there be any drawbacks in particular in different stereo vision?
You're absolutely right, because as I have mentioned in one of my slides, this a depth discontinuity and lighting condition are the critical thing for us to have a proper structure. And a lot of research is going on, and we can observe that proper lighting along with the camera itself really solve our problem. So that the research is there in addressing our depth discontinuity up to a level, but this lighting condition has to be addressed in the future research.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. There were a couple of questions which were left behind. I would just like to ask Dr. Abhijit. Anis A has put forward to you that what is the role of AI in neurorehabilitation? And I think that's...
Yes. Yeah. So that's a very important question. So I avoided it because this needed its own session probably. It's a huge role for AI, sorry, AI neurorehabilitation, multiple domains. One of the most important areas is the area of the augmented reality or the virtual reality, which AI is playing a big role. Especially the augmented reality is very important in the areas of our occupational therapist, physiotherapist, virtual reality-based treadmill working, virtual reality-based upper limb rehabilitation. The other area of AI is cognitive rehabilitation, where now the one area AI is gaining big strides is most of our rehabilitation techniques by robotics, they're not adaptive enough. Because in rehabilitation, you need to match the demand of to the level of patient's performance, which we do intuitively. So when a physiotherapist go to rehab a person, he sees how much the patient can do, and then adjust his goal slightly beyond that reach. So it aims the patient to build up enough challenge. So AI has this ability compared to the standard robotics. It can adapt. It can find out what's the goal, and with say pre-put parameter, and can adjust the goal and target. So yes, AI has a big role in future rehabilitation, and there are multiple areas it's working in future.
Thank you very much. A very important aspect, neurorehabilitation, because it's a spectrum of care that we are looking at stroke at this moment. As we are trying to wind up the session, can I ask all the faculty members to keep the videos on so that we can have a group picture, to have a virtual memory. Hopefully, we don't have this virtual memory again. Sorry. Yeah. So we possibly and hopefully look forward to have a Dr. Ganapathy, Dr. Anita. Dr. Ganapathy? Yeah. Before we end up the session, Dr. Ganapathy is there? Yeah. Before we end up this session, Professor Anita and myself are very delighted to share with you that we are initiating a new startup that is EtiNew, that is Artificial Intelligence in Neurology. And we would like to share a small video of the same. Thank you very much. We are initiating this small one, and we would like more and more people who are interested in AI and research specific to neurology can collaborate with us with their data and with their patients' interest. And we thank our advisors who have been kind enough to be the part of this project and give us their support and help as and when needed. Anita, do you want to chip in anything at all? Thank you. So I myself, Dr. Bindu Menon, with Dr. Manisha Sharma, who is my colleague and also the joint organizing secretary of this conference. Thank all our faculty members, Dr. Manga, Dr. Abhijit, Dr. Ganpati, Dr. Anita, Dr. Shushmita, Dr. Raghavendra, for your excellent talk, enlightening us on something which is very new to people and an upcoming field, and having spent 3 hours of your valuable and precious time with us. Thank you very much for being with us today. All the delegates who have been part of this program, we have more than 400 registered on the Zoom webinar, and we were also on the YouTube live, and we had many of them are streaming there also and watching our program. Thank you very much, all the delegates who have been be a part of this 3-hour program with us. I thank the Apollo management for giving me this opportunity. I sincerely thank the Sun Pharma for giving us this podium and helping us with all the technical support, the digital information media who have been kind enough, and I am very thankful that there were no technical glitches as well during this whole program. I wish all of you, everybody, a very safe, healthy and a prosperous 2021, and hope artificial intelligence helps us to combat this COVID-19 as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any of the faculty would want to say anything? You're welcome, please.
Thank you. Okay, so I just one final words. So I think someone asked Dr. Pedersen this question, whether AI will be able to sort out in future something. I think we're just only scratching the surface of the ability. Again, if you look at the artificial neural network, CNN, they just only eliminate a very simplistic model of neuron. A neuron doesn't work like that. It's a very simplistic model. A neuron work with a lot of other issues, and now we know the astrocytes surrounding the neurons, they have their computational abilities. They have also electrical properties. One area which is going ahead, just in infancy, is neuromorphic computing. Because brain is a different to a computer. It only not changes its software. Actually, brain changes its hardware along to the processing needs. So, which we know, the brain atrophies, one area goes away, other areas takes away, the network takes away a different part. Very, very important in epileptogenic network. So brain works different. So this area we call neuromorphic computing is emerging. So one area is brain drastically different from all other computers is the energy need. Brain needs a fraction of the energy that needs to run these supercomputers. So probably, so this neuromorphic computing, this one group is working, they're very, my next door neighbors in Manchester University, they're doing our Spinnaker modeling, they're spike neuron based thing. So this is a completely different area. And this is probably in future, we'll see AI coming in this way. So what we can see, AI is still not achieved at the level how human brain or the other animal brain can do, because there's a lot process of the evolutionary selection process has gone into it to achieve its optimum peak. So probably AI will take some time to catch up with us. That's the kind of hope we can have. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Manisha?
On a lighter note, ma'am, I want to say on behalf of all those delegates who had a deep relation with artificial intelligence since past, but that is a fiction-based relation basically via Hollywood movies. My personal favorite was her movie featuring Joaquin Phoenix, and it was a great fusion of love and technology. So at the end of the movie, we fell in love with artificial intelligence. I think this conference has bridged that gap between fiction and reality for us. So thank you, Bindu ma'am, and all the faculty members for enlightening us with the magnificent potential of artificial intelligence for the entire mankind. Thank you.
Thank you, Manisha. That's rightly put. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And see you all in 2021 as well.
Thank you.